Have you ever wondered about the secrets history buried and time refused to reveal? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we explore lost artifacts, legendary relics, and wonders that defy explanation. Hit subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's dive in. The book that drew an ash. The sea crashed softly against the granite rocks of Normandy, its foam dissolving into mist that drifted across the tidal flats. At the center of this landscape rose Mont Saint-Michel, a medieval abbey, fortress, and village built upon an island that seemed to hover between sea and sky. From a distance, its spires and ramparts resembled a vision pulled from a dream. For centuries, pilgrims had walked across the shifting sands to reach it, guided by faith, by fear, and by whispers of relics hidden in its libraries. Among the countless manuscripts once stored in the abbey, one became a tale whispered in shadows, the Codex that drew an ash. It was no ordinary book. Bound in worn leather, darkened by centuries of smoke, its pages were said to drink the soot from every fire lit nearby, pulling embers into its margins as though the book itself was alive. Monks who studied it claimed the ink never faded, as if nourished by the gray dust of extinguished flames. They wrote of how the letters seemed to breathe, shifting subtly in the candlelight, their curves alive with faint movement. It was not only a manuscript but a presence, a witness that absorbed the residue of the world, gathering ash as though it were gathering memory. The origins of the Codex were never fully agreed upon. Some said it had been written by scribes fleeing the ruins of Rome, carrying fragments of forgotten knowledge to the edge of the known world. Others whispered it came from the East, carried by traders who dealt in parchment as precious as gold. There was even a tale that it was not written by human hands at all, but appeared one morning upon the abbey's altar, as if left by the archangel himself, sealed in ash that could not be brushed away. Whatever the truth, the Codex of Mont Saint-Michel existed, its smoke-stained pages still resting somewhere deep within the abbey's labyrinth of stone. The monks who copied texts in the scriptorium often complained of the way the Codex altered the air. The room would grow warmer when it was opened, as though a fire smoldered invisibly in the walls. Candle flames burned lower, their wicks bending toward the open pages as if drawn by breath. Sometimes, when they dipped their quills, the ink bled too richly, spreading across the parchment with unusual speed. The words they copied from the Codex were strange as well. Not quite Latin, not quite any language they knew. It was as though the book had its own tongue, one that revealed itself only in fragments, teasing meaning without ever surrendering it fully. Pilgrims who heard of the Codex came not to read it, but to feel it. They described the sensation of standing near it as being close to the remnants of a great fire, the kind that razes cities but leaves their stones smoldering for months. Some reported the faint smell of burning wood when no fire had been lit. Others said their dreams changed after glimpsing the Codex. They dreamed of towers collapsing in flame, of ash falling like snow, of voices chanting in ruined cities. The monks discouraged such visitors, insisting the book was too fragile, too sacred to be handled often. But still, the stories spread, each pilgrim telling another, until the Codex was less a book than a legend. In time, the abbey itself came under siege. Norman raiders, rival lords, and even the sea itself tested its walls. Fires broke out more than once, filling the cloisters with blackened smoke. Yet whenever the embers cooled, the Codex survived. Its pages bore no singe, no scorch, though they grew heavier each time, as if absorbing the fire into themselves. Some swore that during one such blaze, the flames bent away from the Codex entirely, curling back on themselves like waves meeting stone. The monks called it divine protection. Others whispered that the book did not repel fire at all, it consumed it, feeding on it in silence. What troubled the monks most was the ash. After each fire, long after the rest of the abbey had been cleaned, a new layer of gray dust appeared on the Codex's cover. When brushed away, it returned within days. If left undisturbed, it seemed to seep into the cracks of the leather, staining it deeper. Some monks believed these were the ashes of souls, fragments of prayers, sins, and confessions burned away in candlelight. Others claimed it was the residue of forgotten histories, preserved in secret by the Codex itself. Centuries passed. The abbey's walls shifted under new rulers, new wars, new tides of pilgrims, but the Codex remained. During the 100 Years' War, when English forces occupied the region, it was hidden in the deepest vault, carried there at night beneath silence. Soldiers searched, but the Codex never revealed itself to those who did not belong to the abbey. When the French reclaimed Mont Saint-Michel, they celebrated the survival of their fortress and of their relics, none more mysterious than the ash-drawn book. Even the revolution could not destroy it. Many manuscripts were burned, many treasures stripped from their reliquaries, yet the Codex survived once more, as if ash itself were its ally. Some revolutionaries reported that when they tried to seize it, their torches dimmed, their flames sputtered, and the firewood would not catch. The book was left behind in frustration, marked as useless, But when the monks returned in secret years later, they found it waiting, heavier than before, its pages faintly warm to the touch. The modern age brought new eyes to Mont Saint-Michel. Historians catalogued manuscripts, paleographers examined handwriting, chemists studied ink. The codex perplexed them all. Its pigments resisted analysis, revealing no known composition. The parchment did not match local sources, nor did it align with known imports. Tests suggested it was older than the abbey itself, older even than the first records of its existence. The ash embedded in its fibers carried trace elements from fires far distant, some from Normandy, others from places no one could connect to its history. It was as if the codex had traveled through flames across the world, collecting them in silence. Today, the Codex of Mont Saint-Michel is rarely displayed. When it is, visitors remark on the faint shimmer across its surface, a sheen like the glow of embers before they fade. They lean closer and notice how the air tastes faintly metallic, how their breath feels heavier, how silence gathers around the book like a cloak. Some swear that if you linger long enough, the pages seem to move, not turning, but shifting, the ink writhing in patterns that mimic flame. Museum curators dismiss such tales as tricks of light, but the whispers continue. To some, the codex is a relic of faith, proof that divine protection can guard even the frailest parchment from centuries of war and fire. To others, it is a darker mystery, a book that consumes what burns around it, drawing in ash not to preserve but to feed. No one has yet dared to burn it directly, though the thought lingers in the minds of skeptics and seekers alike. What would happen if the codex were thrown into flame? Would it burn at last, or would the fire vanish into its pages, leaving only silence? The tides continue to rise and fall at Mont Saint-Michel, washing the sands clean each day, only for new pilgrims to arrive and cross them once more. Inside the abbey the codex rests, neither fully alive nor dead, a vessel of ash and memory. Those who pass by it lower their voices, uncertain whether they stand before a book or before something older, something waiting, something that remembers every fire the world has ever known. And so it remains, the book that drew in ash. The Ark that never opens. The city of Axum rests quietly in the highlands of northern Ethiopia, a place where stone obelisks rise into the sky, where churches echo with chants older than memory, and where legends do not fade with time, but grow stronger with every telling. For centuries, pilgrims have climbed the rugged paths that lead to its heart, carrying questions, prayers, and whispers of a relic that no one may see, but everyone believes waits there in silence. That relic is said to be the Ark of the Covenant itself, the chest of gold and acacia wood once carried by the Israelites through deserts and across rivers, once guarded by kings and prophets, once described as the throne of God upon earth. And here, in Axum, they say it still rests, locked away, never opened. The Ark has always been more than an object. In Scripture it was a vessel of command, a sacred chest that held the tablets of law, Aaron's rod, and manna from heaven. When the Israelites carried it into battle, enemies fled in terror, and when priests placed it in the tabernacle, fire descended from heaven. Yet in Axum, the Ark is spoken of not as a story from distant lands, but as a living presence. For here it is not merely remembered, it is guarded. It is kept within the walls of a single chapel, where only one guardian may look upon it, and even he is forbidden to open it. The story of how it came to Ethiopia stretches across centuries, stitched together by devotion, legend, and fragments of history. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark was brought from Jerusalem in the days of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The queen, known in Ethiopia as Makeda, traveled to meet the wise king in his court, and from their meeting came a son, Menelik, the first emperor of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. When Menelik came of age, he journeyed to Jerusalem to meet his father, and there, some say, he was given the Ark itself to carry back to his mother's land. Others claim it was taken without Solomon's knowing, spirited away across deserts and seas, guarded by angels. However it came to Ethiopia, the tale insists that it was placed in Axum, where it has remained ever since. Travelers from distant lands recorded the story with curiosity and awe. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims spoke of a holy relic hidden in Ethiopia's highlands, a treasure so sacred it could not be touched. Later explorers, uncertain whether to believe, nonetheless returned with tales of the Ark's resting place, guarded by priests who spoke of it in hushed tones. When asked to prove its existence, the guardians would only shake their heads, saying the Ark must never be revealed, never opened, for to open it would not simply be to risk destruction of the relic, it would be to unseal a force that no human hand could endure. The guardian of the Ark is a figure set apart from all others. Known as the Keeper, he is chosen not by his own will, but by tradition, appointed for life to watch over the sacred chest. Once chosen, he never again leaves the chapel grounds. He does not see his family. He does not walk the streets of Axum. He does not travel beyond the walls. His entire existence becomes one of vigilance and prayer, devoted wholly to the Ark. To see it is to take on its weight, and few dare even to meet the gaze of the keeper, for his eyes are said to reflect the burden of centuries. When a keeper grows old, he names a successor, who takes up the task in turn, continuing the unbroken chain of guardianship. No outsider has been permitted within the chapel. Its walls are plain, its roof simple, but its presence commands reverence. Pilgrims gather outside, circling its perimeter, whispering prayers into the air, believing the ark within can hear them. They bring offerings, candles and cloths, laying them on the ground as signs of devotion. Many kneel in silence, eyes closed, convinced that the ark radiates a force beyond sight, that its power reaches them through stone and shadow. Some claim to feel warmth as they stand near the chapel, as though sunlight touches their skin even in darkness. Others describe a trembling beneath their feet, like the earth itself recognizes what rests there. Stories of the ark's power linger in Ethiopia as though they happened yesterday. Tales speak of priests struck down when they drew too close without preparation. Their skin burned though no flame touched them. There are whispers of battles where enemies fled not from swords but from visions of fire that erupted from the ark's presence. In villages, mothers still warn their children that to mock the ark is to invite misfortune, for it does not tolerate irreverence. Whether these are warnings or memories is impossible to say. What is certain is that the ark remains untouched, its lid sealed, its secrets hidden. The mystery has drawn scholars as surely as it has pilgrims. Some argue that the ark never came to Ethiopia, that it was lost in Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem, or hidden beneath the Temple Mount, or buried in secret caves. They suggest that the ark in Axum is but a replica, a symbol of faith. Yet when asked to prove otherwise, none can. The ark is not displayed, yet its presence cannot be denied. The devotion of the guardians, the unbroken tradition, the power of the belief itself, all these stand as testimony. Whether it is the original Ark of the Covenant or not, in Axum it is treated as though it were, and for believers that is enough. The very act of never opening it has become its greatest power. In a world where relics are dissected, tested, and measured, the Ark resists. Its mystery deepens with every century that passes without revelation. The refusal to unveil it has preserved not only the object but the awe that surrounds it. To open it would be to reduce it to something ordinary, subject to doubt. By never opening it, the Ark remains more than wood and gold. It remains infinite possibility, infinite memory, infinite fear. Within Axum, life flows around the chapel like a river around a stone. Markets bustle with voices, children play in the dust, processions wind through narrow streets carrying crosses and chants. Yet always, in the background, the chapel stands, its shadow falling across the square, its presence reminding all that the Ark rests inside. During festivals, the Ark is honored by proxy. Priests carry replicas draped in cloth, leading processions where the faithful dance, sing, and shower flowers upon the ground. But the true Ark never moves, never opens. Its silence is its testimony. Those who guard it say they hear sounds in the night, a low hum, like wind trapped in stone. Sometimes the air grows heavy inside the chapel, so thick that breath comes hard. At times the keeper dreams of fire, of rivers parting, of voices chanting in languages long forgotten. Yet when morning comes, the Ark remains as it always has, closed, waiting. The keeper does not ask why. His task is not to question, only to guard. Centuries of kings and empires have risen and fallen around Axum. Armies have marched, trade has flourished and faltered, droughts and wars have scarred the land. But the Ark has remained constant. Through the shifting tides of history, it has been a still point, a weight that anchors Ethiopia's faith to something beyond human reach. To some, this constancy is proof of divine presence. To others, it is proof only of human devotion. Yet whether divine or earthly, its endurance is undeniable. Visitors still come, year after year. Some climb mountains to reach Axum, their feet blistered, their backs bent beneath the sun. Others arrive by plane or bus, carrying cameras and questions. Yet whether pilgrim or tourist, all leave with the same unanswered silence. They cannot see the Ark, they cannot touch it, they cannot even step inside the chapel, and yet they return home with stories of standing near the unopenable Ark, of feeling its weight, though they never glimpsed it. The Ark that never opens has become not only an object of faith, but also of imagination. It exists in the space between belief and secrecy, between memory and silence. To know it is impossible. To doubt it is unsatisfying. And so it continues, its lid sealed, its guardians watching, its presence unyielding. Perhaps it is there to remind us that some mysteries must remain unsolved, that some truths are too great to be reduced to sight. Perhaps its silence is the point, not what lies within, but what its unopened state awakens within those who believe. Night falls over Axum, and the chapel grows dark. The keeper kneels before the Ark, whispering prayers in the silence. Outside, the stars wheel above the ancient city, the same stars that shone when Menelik is said to have carried the Ark across deserts. the same stars that burned above Jerusalem when it was first made. Within the chapel, the ark waits, untouched, unopenable, eternal. And in that waiting, it holds not only what may lie inside, but also the weight of every life that has ever believed in it. The ark that never opens remains more than a relic. It is a mystery carved into the heart of a nation, a silence that speaks louder than revelation. It waits, and because it waits, we continue to wonder. The sword that waited in stone. They say that not all swords are forged in fire. Some are born of water, whispered into being by mist and moonlight, and some wait. In the lonely reaches of Cornwall where the land meets restless seas, and the granite moors stretch wide as if dreaming, there is a pool, a dark sheet of water cradled by heather and peat, where reeds bend as though listening, and where stories cling tighter than stone. This is Dawsbury Pool, quiet, brooding, endless in its own shallow way, yet in its depths is said to sleep one of the most mysterious relics of legend, the sword that waited in stone. Not just any blade, but one that has lived many lives in many tales, sometimes called the sword in the stone, sometimes Excalibur, sometimes by names lost to time. It is a weapon, yes, but also a question, a test, a riddle written in iron. Who is worthy, who is not, and what happens to a kingdom when its fate is bound to steel? The story begins, as it so often does, not with the sword itself but with silence. Imagine a dawn long ago, before parchment carried chronicles, when only fireside tongues kept memory. The pool lay still beneath drifting fog. Around it stretched a Cornwall not yet shaped by miners, not yet scarred by roads. Sheep moved like pale stones across the hills, and the cries of curlews circled the air. In that quiet, people gathered and spoke of a blade that would only awaken for the rightful one. Some swore the Lady of the Lake herself, pale-armed and eternal, cradled it beneath the waters. Others told of druids who sank offerings here, each rusted dagger and bronze spear a prayer for harvests and sun. Perhaps, they said, the sword was simply one of these offerings, lifted by myth into majesty, yet none could prove it. For the pool revealed nothing, only reeds, dark water, and the uncanny silence of a place too old to explain. But the tale would not stay at the water's edge. It unfurled across generations, woven into the great legend of Arthur. For in some tellings, the boy king proved his right to rule by drawing a sword from a stone, a task no man before him could accomplish. In others, it was not stone but water that yielded him his blade, gifted by a woman who was not quite mortal. And in still more versions, the two stories mingle, as if the land itself could not decide which memory to keep. The pool, however, kept both. Its surface mirrored the sky, clouds drifting across like phantom sails. At night, stars speckled its skin, and people whispered that somewhere beneath those reflections gleamed iron, waiting for a hand strong enough, heart pure enough to claim it. Was it really there? Did Excalibur sleep beneath the dark reeds of Cornwall, or was the pool itself the sword, holding its secret not to be wielded, but to remind men that power, like water, can never truly be held? The centuries rolled on. Romans came, stamping their roads across moor and marsh. Saxons followed, then Normans, each wave leaving stones of their faith behind, chapels, crosses, towers. Yet still Dawsbury Pool remained, its silence unbroken. Pilgrims passed it on their way to Bodmin or Truro, glancing uneasily at its waters. Shepherds warned children not to linger near its edge. Travelers said the pool had no bottom, that it was a gate to another world, and always the story of the sword lingered. Bards sang it in halls, minstrels carried it from village to village. By candlelight, children listened, their eyes wide, imagining the sword's hilt glimmering just beneath the water, waiting for them. But the sword never rose. What does it mean for a blade to wait? A weapon's purpose is to be wielded, its edge to bite, its steel to sing. Yet the sword in the stone, the sword in the pool, seemed instead to live only in waiting. It was less an object and more a promise, less a blade and more a threshold. Those who longed for kingship dreamed of it. Those who feared chaos dreaded it. And those who lived by myth, the storytellers, the poets, understood that the sword itself did not matter. What mattered was the silence around it, the mystery. And so, generation by generation, Dawsbury Pool kept its vigil. Imagine yourself walking there now. The moorland wind brushes your cheek, sharp with salt from the sea. Sheep paths wind crooked through heather, and granite boulders lean half buried in the soil, older than memory. You crest a ridge, and there below lies the pool, a dark mirror, oval, glinting faintly beneath drifting cloud. It looks small, smaller than the weight of its legend would suggest. But that is the way of myths. They do not require vastness, only depth. Stand at its edge long enough, and you may begin to feel it, that waiting. Not menace, not welcome, but simply a presence. The reeds sway, though no wind stirs. The water dimples, though no stone was thrown. It is as if the pool is breathing, as if the land itself remembers. And if you gaze long enough, you might fancy a glint, just for a moment, deep beneath the water. Something straight, metallic, impossible. Was it only sunlight striking stone? Or was it the sword, still waiting, as it has for centuries? Arthur, legend says, did not keep the sword forever. When his battles were done, when wounds weighed heavy and the dream of Camelot faltered, he gave the blade back. He told his loyal knight, Bedivere, to cast it into water. Twice Bedivere hesitated, unable to let such a weapon go. But at last, on the third try, he hurled it into the dark. And from the depths, a hand rose, pale, strong, unearthly. It caught the sword, brandished it once in the air, and sank. Where? Some say into a lake in the north. Some say into Avalon, which may be no place at all but only a word for departure. But in Cornwall, the whispers always return to Dusmary Pool. For if the Lady of the Lake ever lived, this seems a fitting home for her. Today the pool remains. Farmers still tend sheep on its banks. Walkers still pause at its edge. And though science has measured its depth and found it shallow, no more than a few meters, still the legend clings. For mystery is not bound by measurement. The sword has not risen, no rightful king has claimed it. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the sword was never meant for one man alone. Perhaps it was meant for all who pause at its waters and wonder, what would I do if I held power? If the blade rose for me? Would I build a kingdom or break it? Would I guard or destroy? In this way the sword still waits. Not for Arthur, not for Bedivere, not for a knight or a king. It waits for us, in questions whispered across centuries, in reflections rippling on a dark Cornish pool. So the next time you find yourself wandering a moor, when mist presses low and the land feels ancient, remember Dusmary Pool. Remember the sword that waited in stone. It does not matter whether it is truly there, beneath mud and reed. What matters is that it waits, and will wait, as long as stories are told. For in the end, it was never only a sword, it was silence given shape. It was hope carved in iron. It was the dream that one day someone, somewhere, might prove worthy, and so it rests still, the sword that waited in stone. The disk that drew down the sky. Beneath the unbroken sky of Egypt, where the horizon burns each morning with a golden fire, there exists the memory of a sacred object, a circle of metal said to draw the sun itself into human hands, the Fayum Sun Disk. It is not merely an artifact of stone or bronze, not a trinket left upon the sands of time, but a vessel of belief, a mirror for eternity, a binding of heaven to earth. To speak of it is to speak of the Nile itself, of the endless cycles of flood and retreat, of sowing and harvest, of dawn and dusk, of the eternal rhythm that ruled every breath of the ancient world. In its form, the people of Egypt found more than art. They found the cosmos reflected, the fire that gave them life made tangible, and a bridge between themselves and the gods, whose presence filled the air with unseen weight. The disk was round, flawless, designed to echo the great circle that rose from the east each morning, the circle whose warmth could coax barley from the soil and lotus from the waters, and whose absence brought terror, cold, and death. To hold the disk was to capture the sun, to take within reach what should have remained untouchable, to bind light to earth for the brief span of a ceremony. Priests would raise it high at dawn, its face flashing in the first beams of Ra, and in that instant it was not a tool but a god, not a reflection but the very eye of the heavens gazing back. The Fayum itself, a land of fertility carved into the desert, was a place where water and sky mingled, where crocodiles slid through reeds, where the temples rose in white stone against the horizon. Here people prayed not only to the Nile but to the sun, whose chariot wheeled each day across the sky. The disk stood at the center of those prayers, a polished circle through which the first light was caught and spread, its glow spilling across the temple courts like molten fire. When priests chanted hymns to Ra, Horus, or Aten, their voices echoing against the columns, it was the disk that answered, the disk that gleamed in the fire of dawn and told all present that the god had heard. Farmers, watching from beyond the temple walls, believed its blessing would reach the fields. Mothers hoped its glow might fall upon their children. Kings trusted that its light would preserve their reign. The act was not symbolic but living. The Egyptians believed the sun could truly be bound, that its spirit could descend into the crafted form, that in the instant of sunrise the eternal fire was drawn down, made close, made near. And from this grew myths, whispered and retold. Some said the disk was not made by mortal hands but had fallen from the sky, a piece of the firmament cooled into metal. Others swore it was hammered in secret by priests who knew the names of the stars, who spoke to the hidden powers of flame and breath. It was said that if one gazed too long into its face they would not see themselves, but visions of the future, the path of dynasties, the battles yet unformed, the rise and fall of kingdoms. Kings were said to consult it at moments of doubt, lifting it before them as the dawn broke and seeking their fate in the light it returned. Ordinary people believed that a glance upon it could heal fevers, cleanse sickness, even banish demons that lingered in the shadows of night. And there were darker tales too, of those who dared to hold it outside the ritual, who claimed it whispered with voices not of Ra, but of the hidden gods of night, a reminder that fire can illuminate but also consume. The design itself was a scripture in metal. Concentric circles radiated from its center, like the spreading light of dawn. Some scholars say these rings marked not only the beauty of the sun, but the cycles of time, the endless rhythm of day and night, birth and death, flood and retreat. There were rays, etched or embossed, stretching outward like hands of fire, as though the disk reached for infinity. Others discerned serpents entwined in the design, guardians of the eternal flame, recalling Apophis, the serpent of chaos, whom Ra battled each night on his journey through the underworld. Thus the disk was more than beauty, it was a battlefield in miniature, a charm against darkness, a weapon wielded not in war but in prayer. It embodied the promise that the sun would rise again, that chaos would fail, that light would return to the world no matter how deep the night. In ritual, the disk became the axis of the world. Picture a temple courtyard, shadowed columns surrounding an open space, the air cool with night, incense rising in pale threads. The priests gather, their linen robes brushed with dawn's first color, their voices low and resonant, calling the names of Ra. They raise the disk upon a stand or in their hands, and as the horizon kindles with flame, the surface catches it, a sudden burst of brilliance that blinds those watching, a moment where the earth holds the sun. In that instant the gods are near. The hymns rise louder, drums beat, hands are lifted to the sky, then the light spreads outward, spilling across the flagstones, illuminating the carved faces of gods upon the walls, touching the eyes of statues so that they seem alive, awake, returned to the world. When the ceremony ends, when the sun climbs fully into the sky, the disk is lowered, veiled, hidden away in shadow, its duty complete until the next dawn. Though the centuries buried it, though time fractured its form, the power of the Fayum disk has not faded. What remains is tarnished, worn, incomplete, yet to stand before it, even now, is to feel the echo of its fire. One sees not a relic but a memory of sunrises long past, of priests chanting as day broke over the Nile, of kings bowing before the god of light. One hears the murmur of water, the cry of ibis and heron, the rustle of palm leaves stirred by a morning wind, and one feels, above all, the pull of the sky itself, the eternal cycle that bound the ancients and still binds us, the sun rising, the sun setting, the endless wheel of time. The disk is broken, yet it remains a mirror of infinity, a fragment of the cosmos made solid, a voice of fire that once answered human prayer, and in this way it continues to speak. It tells us that mankind has always sought to reach beyond, to capture what lies untouchable, to hold in our hands the infinite. It tells us that we are not so different from those who once raised it at dawn, eyes lifted to the light, hearts bound in hope that the sun would rise again. The Fayum Sun Disk is not only Egypt's, not only the past's, it is a symbol of all humanity's yearning, our unending desire to draw the sky down to earth, to bind eternity into form, and to find, within its glow, the promise that life continues. In it remains a mirror of the eternal fire above. The mask that waited in shadows. In the far reaches of northern China, where the grasslands roll into soft waves and the sky seems endlessly wide, there lies the memory of a people long vanished. The Hongshan culture, flourishing nearly 5,000 years ago, has left behind few words, no written histories, and no temples standing against the march of centuries. What they left instead were shapes carved from jade, shadows of belief pressed into stone, and among them, something that speaks louder than any chronicle, the Horned Jade Mask. It is not large, nor is it adorned with gold or jewels, yet it commands a gravity that scholars still feel when they stand before it. Its face is both human and not, its horns arching like those of a beast that belongs half to earth and half to myth. And in that tension between human and animal, spirit and world, the mask lingers, waiting, carrying with it whispers of rites that shape the first echoes of Chinese civilization. The story of this mask does not begin in the quiet glass cases of a museum, nor in the excavation pits where soil was brushed from its smooth green surface. It begins in the lives of the Hongshan themselves. They were a people of farmers, hunters, and early builders who lived between 4700 and 2900 BCE. Their villages were modest, but within them lay something remarkable: ritual sites, sacred enclosures, and burial mounds filled not with common tools but with offerings of jade, bone, and clay. To them, jade was not mere decoration. It was breath and stone together, the material of spirits. They carved it into dragons that curled like smoke, into discs that seemed to mirror the sun, and into masks whose eyes could pierce through the darkness of death. The horned mask is among the rarest of these artifacts. Measuring just a few inches across, it is small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, and yet its presence feels too large to be contained. Its design is spare but deliberate, two curved horns that rise symmetrically from the brow, a face with hollowed eyes, and faint traces of a mouth that does not speak but instead seems to watch in silence. The Hongshan artisans who shaped it worked without metal tools, relying only on sand, grit, and endless patience. To imagine the labor is to understand its significance. This was not something fashioned in idle moments. Every line carved into the jade was an act of devotion, every polish of the stone a way to invite eternity to inhabit its form. And yet, what was the mask meant to do? Was it worn, pressed against the face of a priest or shaman as they entered a trance, their body lending breath to the spirit the mask contained? Or was it laid upon the dead, not to cover the features of the departed, but to give them a new visage in the afterlife, a face not of human flesh but of mythic power? The truth is uncertain, but the soil in which the mask was found offers clues. Jade objects were often buried in tombs, alongside carefully placed bones of animals and fragments of painted pottery. These were not random assemblages but choreographed offerings, gestures toward a world beyond sight. The horned mask may have been an emissary, guiding the dead or guarding them from what waited beyond. The horns themselves demand contemplation. Horns are primal symbols, marks of strength, virility, and connection to the animal world. In many cultures, to wear horns was to borrow the power of beasts, to walk between the boundary of human and other. For the Hongshan, whose lives depended on both the taming of herds and the hunt, the horn was a reminder of life's precarious balance. To carve horns onto a jade mask was to ensure that balance did not end with death but continued in shadowed realms where the ancestors dwelled. Perhaps, too, the horns marked the mask as belonging not to a person but to a deity, a spirit of the earth or sky who demanded respect through ritual smoke and whispered prayer. The Hongshan landscape itself helps us imagine how such a mask might have been used. On high ridges and lonely hills, archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial platforms built of stone, circular structures aligned with the heavens. From these heights, the people could watch the stars, track the seasons, and perhaps call to powers greater than themselves. Imagine a night when the fires burned low, when a figure stood within the circle, their face hidden behind the cool gleam of a jade mask. Around them the people would gather, hushed, watching as the horns of the mask caught the firelight. The figure would raise their hands, chant, and with each breath the mask itself would seem to breathe, as though the stone had awakened. When we gaze upon the horned mask today, sealed behind protective glass, we cannot hear those chants or smell the smoke of the fires that once curled into the night. Yet the silence of the artifact is not emptiness, it is waiting. It asks us to imagine, to lean forward into the unknown, to grant it the role it once played in the imagination of its makers. And in doing so, we realize the Hongshan were not so distant from us. They too sought to bridge the gap between the visible and the invisible, to anchor themselves in a universe vast and mysterious. Their mask is not a relic of superstition, but a reminder of humanity's oldest impulse, to shape matter into meaning, to carve the eternal out of the fragile. The horned mask also invites reflection on jade itself. To the Hongshan, jade was life condensed into stone. Unlike softer materials, jade resisted shattering. It glowed with a soft translucence, capturing light in ways that suggested depth and spirit. Later Chinese dynasties would adopt jade as the stone of immortality, crafting burial suits sewn with gold thread, and declaring it the purest of materials. But long before emperors, the Hongshan were already whispering this truth through their carvings. The horned mask is thus not just a face but a philosophy, a belief that through jade, one could touch what lay beyond the limits of flesh. What makes the mask all the more powerful is its rarity. Few such masks have been found, and fewer still with horns. This uniqueness suggests it was not a common item, but one reserved for figures of authority, shamans, chiefs, or perhaps those individuals chosen to carry the weight of ritual. To hold the mask would be to carry the responsibility of the community, to become the mediator between people and gods. When buried, it ensured that the individual's role did not end with their final breath but continued in silence, in shadow, in the realms where ancestors rule. As centuries passed, the Hongshan culture faded, villages emptied, ceremonies ceased, and new peoples came to till the land. Yet beneath the earth, the mask remained, untouched by time, waiting. When modern archaeologists uncovered it, the world had changed beyond recognition, and yet the mask's gaze was unaltered. Its eyes still stared into eternity. Its horns still curved upward as if toward the sky. Holding it now is to hold not just jade, but time itself. The horned jade mask stands as a question more than an answer. What stories were spoken beneath its shadow? What prayers were carried through its silent mouth? What visions were seen through its eyes? Each possibility is a thread, and together they weave a tapestry of belief that refuses to vanish. For though the Hongshan are gone, their mask still waits, teaching us that even in silence, objects can speak, and even in shadows, meaning endures. To speak of the Horned Jade Mask is not only to dwell in its silence but also to follow the echoes it leaves behind. For an artifact so small, it casts a long shadow, one that stretches beyond the Hongshan Hills, into the unfolding of Chinese civilization itself. When later dynasties carved their ritual bronzes, when emperors wore the dragon as their emblem, when jade burial suits shimmered in royal tombs, they were knowingly or not walking paths first traced by these early artisans of the North. The mask does not stand alone. It is a fragment of a greater chorus, a voice that still resonates when we listen carefully enough. Yet to listen means to surrender to imagination. Scholars may catalogue, measure, and compare, but objects such as this resist neat explanation. The mask is a riddle that refuses to yield, a face that cannot be unmasked. Perhaps this is its greatest power, for in being unknowable, it forces us to confront the very things we cannot control: death, time, and the gulf between the living and the departed. The Hongshan may have understood this far better than we do. Their rituals, however strange they seem to us, were not mere superstition. They were scaffolding built to hold up the weight of mystery. The landscape that nurtured them was not gentle. Northern China's climate demanded resilience, shifting between fertile stretches and sudden droughts. Life was precarious, and in such uncertainty, ritual became anchor. Imagine a community gathered on a windswept hill, the seasons turning toward winter, the harvest already stored, but fear lingering in the cold air. At the heart of the gathering stands a figure wearing the Horned Jade Mask. The jade glimmers faintly in torchlight, horns casting shadows across stone. A drum beats, steady, marking time not just for the body, but for the soul. The figure raises their hands, calling not for wealth or conquest, but for balance, for rain when it is needed, for protection against illness, for peace between the living and those who no longer breathe. Such moments are not recorded, yet the mask suggests them. Its existence implies action, use, and intention. It was carved to serve, not simply to rest, and in that service, it carried meaning across generations. Children may have grown up watching it lifted into ceremony, associating its sight with awe, with trembling, with the knowledge that they too were part of a thread stretching backward into ancestors and forward into descendants. To see the mask was to feel continuity, the promise that life was not solitary but woven into something greater. This sense of continuity resonates with the Hongshan's other jade works, particularly their dragons. The C-shaped jade dragons they carved are unlike the imperial dragons that would later dominate Chinese culture, yet they carry the same sense of movement, of a creature suspended between worlds. The horned mask belongs to that same imagination, hybrid, fluid, alive with possibility. It tells us that the Hongshan were already shaping a mythic language, one that would endure, adapt, and resurface in countless forms over millennia. And yet, while it connects, the mask also isolates. When you look at it, you sense its gaze is not for you alone, but for something beyond you. The hollowed eyes do not meet yours. They stare past, through, into. They remind us that ritual was not performance, but encounter. The mask was not meant to impress human spectators, but to draw the attention of forces unseen. Its silence is not emptiness, but listening, a patient waiting for the voices of gods, spirits, or ancestors. There is also the question of fear. Power is rarely gentle, and the mask's visage hints at intimidation as much as protection. The horns curve like weapons, the expression unreadable. Was it meant to comfort or to terrify? To reassure the living that their dead would be cared for, or to warn wandering spirits to keep their distance? The line is thin, perhaps deliberately so. To wield the mask was to embody both, the nurturing guide and the stern guardian. Its wearer would have been both priest and sentinel, moving between kindness and command. When archaeologists first unearthed the mask, they held in their hands not just jade but the residue of centuries of faith. Soil clung to it, the silence of burial heavy around it. To lift it into light was to break its long vigil, to draw it from shadows where it had waited patiently for millennia. What thoughts filled the minds of those who first saw it glint again under the sun? Likely a mix of awe and disbelief. How could something so delicate, so polished, survive so long in silence? And yet survival is part of jade's nature. It resists time, carrying forward the intentions of those who shaped it. Even when all else crumbles, that survival reminds us that the mask does not belong only to the past. It lives now, in our gaze, in our questions. Each scholar who studies it adds another layer to its story. Each visitor who pauses before its display renews its role as mediator between worlds, between the living and the dead, between past and present, between certainty and wonder. It is still waiting in shadows, not because it has been forgotten, but because shadows are its element. It does not need light to exist. It thrives in the liminal, the in-between. The Horned Jade Mask is a threshold. To look upon it is to stand on the edge of what can be known and what must remain mysterious. It is a reminder that humanity's earliest civilizations did not emerge only through tools and farming, but through belief, through ritual, through the shaping of objects that held meaning deeper than survival. The Hongshan did not carve masks because they needed them to live. They carved them because they needed them to understand life itself, and perhaps that is why it still speaks. For we too seek meaning. We too reach toward what we cannot touch. In the hollowed eyes of the jade mask, we see ourselves, not in likeness, but in longing. It is the face of humanity's oldest questions. Who are we? Where do we go when the breath leaves us? What lies in the shadows we cannot banish? The mask offers no answers. It does not comfort us with certainty. Instead, it waits, silent, patient, a witness carved from stone. And maybe that is the greatest gift it gives. For in its waiting, it teaches us to sit with mystery, to accept that not all things can be explained, and that sometimes the truest wisdom lies in the shadows themselves. The tomb that faced the ocean. There are monuments carved in stone, monuments raised in bronze, monuments that shout their meaning with inscriptions and statues. But sometimes the most powerful memorials are the quiet ones, the ones that carry no name, no boast, no list of victories or titles. Along the rugged Portuguese coast, where cliffs rise above restless waters, and the air is salted with the memory of countless voyages, there rests such a monument, the tomb of the unknown sailor. It is not vast, nor glittering, nor burdened with treasure. It does not call to travelers with grandeur. Instead, it waits in silence, looking always toward the horizon, where sea meets sky. Its simplicity is its strength, for in its stone and in its silence, it speaks for all the nameless who vanished into the waves, those whose stories ended not on land, but beneath the ocean's shifting skin. The Portuguese know the sea not as background, but as presence, as constant companion. For centuries it has been their road, their wealth, their danger, their identity. The age of discovery, which reshaped the world, was born of these shores, in harbors where wooden ships gathered, sails swelling like wings, men setting forth to chart coasts unknown, to carry spices and faith and hunger for empire. Yet for every vessel that returned laden with cargo and glory, there were others that did not return at all. The ocean gave, and the ocean took away. It is said the tomb was raised not for one man but for all men, or perhaps it was built for one who came ashore, lifeless, carried by tides, never to be claimed. A body without a name, yet given a resting place, facing always the waters that had been both companion and grave. Its presence is a confession, an acknowledgement that the sea does not surrender all its secrets, that there will always be those whose names vanish but whose memory cannot be denied. Standing by the tomb, you feel the wind pressing against you, sharp with salt, restless with the sound of waves. The Atlantic rolls without pause, carrying memories of centuries, galleons, caravels, fishing boats, wrecks sunk to the sand. To face this ocean is to face history itself, and to admit that history is as much about the lost as the found. The tomb carries no long inscription, but it whispers nonetheless. It speaks to the families who watched men go, never to return. It speaks to mothers who looked out across gray waters, to children who grew up with an empty chair at the table, to lovers who stood on cliffs scanning the horizon until eyes burned with tears. It speaks of duty and hunger, of ambition and tragedy. It is, in its way, the most honest of monuments because it honors not victory, but absence. To understand the tomb of the unknown sailor, one must imagine the centuries of departures. Lisbon, Porto, Lagos, and smaller fishing villages all along the coast were stages of farewell. Men kissed their families goodbye, stepped onto creaking planks, felt the swell of the deck beneath their feet, and disappeared into distance. Some would come back to bring tales of Brazil, of Africa, of India and beyond. But for others, the sea kept them. No grave but water, no marker but waves. In medieval times, to die at sea was a liminal death. Priests could not bless the burial, no stone was raised, no earth was cast. Sailors became both everywhere and nowhere, their bodies mingling with the currents, their souls entrusted to whatever god watched the waters. For Catholic Portugal, this was an ache, a death without ritual, a life without closure. And so, when an unclaimed sailor was laid in the tomb facing the ocean, he became more than himself. He became proxy for all of them, a vessel for countless unspoken prayers. Even now, when the sea is charted and mapped, when ships are steel rather than oak, the tomb keeps its meaning. Fishermen still go out and do not return. Storms still rise with little warning. Boats vanish, and families stand on the same cliffs as their ancestors, waiting for word that does not come. The tomb remains their reminder that the unknown sailor is never truly alone, because he is joined by all who share his fate. Tourists who visit might see only a stone, but those who pause and listen will hear more. They will hear the sound of ropes straining, sails snapping in wind, gulls crying overhead. They will hear men calling to one another across decks, slick with spray. They will hear the sudden crack of storm, the rush of waves swallowing, the silence that follows when a ship is gone. The tomb listens to all of this. It does not judge, it does not ask, it only remembers. Legends cling to it, as they cling to all places where memory runs deep. Some say that on certain nights when the moon is high and the tide runs strong, you can hear footsteps by the tomb, as though the unknown sailor walks again. Others say that if you stand before it at dawn, you may see ships on the horizon that are not there. Ghost vessels, masts gleaming with spectral light, sailing silently toward eternity. Fishermen who live with the sea's caprice sometimes leave offerings at the tomb. A coil of rope, a carved figure of a boat, a small anchor. They do not say why, but the gesture is clear. It is a pact, a recognition, a whisper. Remember us when our turn comes. The tomb, though humble, also belongs to the greater story of Portugal's relationship with the ocean. It is not so different in spirit from the grand monuments of Lisbon, with their stone towers and engraved names of explorers. Yet where those celebrate, this mourns. Where those shout, this one waits. It balances the narrative, reminding all who look upon it that the sea's gifts were purchased at a price that cannot be measured only in gold or maps. Sometimes schoolchildren are brought to see it, their teachers explaining its meaning. They do not always understand, but they sense its solemnity. They stand quieter than usual, watching the endless sea. Perhaps some of them dream of ships, of voyages, of adventure. Perhaps some sense the weight of history, the shadow of those who went before. In either case, the tomb plants itself in their memory, to be recalled later in life when they too stand at thresholds of absence. It is strange to think how many eyes have looked out from this coast, eyes of sailors, of wives, of children, of old men, and how many of those eyes never saw their loved ones again. The tomb does not record their names, but in its silence, it holds them all. The ocean may erase, but stone remembers. Standing there today, one might be tempted to see it as relic, as something belonging only to the past. But the truth is harsher and simpler. The tomb is always present. Every time a boat leaves harbor, every time a storm gathers, every time a family waits for word, the tomb gains new weight. It is not finished, because the sea's story is not finished. The tomb of the unknown sailor is not only a Portuguese story, it belongs to all seafaring peoples, to anyone who has watched a vessel vanish on the horizon and wondered if it would return. It is universal in its grief, in its reverence, in its quiet insistence that even the nameless must be honored. Perhaps that is why it continues to draw people, because in its silence, it speaks not only of sailors, but of all who have been lost to elements beyond human control, and so it stands, facing always toward the waters, unmoving while the sea never rests. It is a dialogue between stone and tide, between permanence and change. One day, the stone will wear down, but until then it keeps its vigil. It remembers when others forget. It carries weight when others cannot. It waits in silence, facing the horizon, holding in its heart the truth that to go to sea is always to gamble with absence. The tomb does not seek answers, nor does it promise them. It offers instead presence, a reminder that loss can be honored even when it cannot be undone. It is, in the end, a monument to all who are lost, and to the living who must carry on without them. Facing the ocean, it holds vigil, not for one sailor, but for all, and in that vigil, it reminds us that the sea is vast, but memory is deeper still. The crown that grew from earth. In the quiet hills of Guarazar, Spain, beneath skies that shift from pale blue to the deep gold of afternoon sun, there lies a crown that seems to emerge not from human hands but from the soil itself. The golden crown of Guarazar is not merely an object of precious metal, jewels, and delicate craftsmanship. It is a relic, a witness to centuries of faith, power, conquest, devotion, and the fragile balance of earthly ambition. It is said that when the crown was discovered, it did not announce itself with fanfare or ceremony. It simply lay in the earth, waiting, as if aware that time itself would bear witness to its story. The Visigoths, who ruled the Iberian Peninsula long before modern Spain emerged, were a people both of war and devotion, carving kingdoms from the land while honoring traditions passed from Roman hands. The crown is a reflection of their world, their wealth, and their intricate understanding of symbolism. Made of gold studded with precious stones, each curve and twist, each finely wrought cross and delicate filigree, carries with it meaning that stretches far beyond the value of the metal itself. It is a map of belief, a testament to the sacred and the worldly, a reminder that power was as much divine as it was earthly. To hold such a crown is to feel the pulse of history beneath your fingertips. It is to imagine the hands that created it, steady and skilled, guided by artisans who understood not only goldsmithing but theology, cosmology, and the visual language of kingship. Each gem tells a story of trade and conquest. Garnets and sapphires from lands far beyond Iberia, amber that carried whispers of northern forests, pearls that once floated in distant seas. The crown does not merely adorn, it communicates. It speaks of legitimacy, of divine right, of authority grounded in both heaven and earth. When it was buried, along with other treasures in the royal treasury of Guarazar, it was meant to survive centuries of war, conquest, and decay. The Visigothic kingdom, like many before and after, faced invasions, shifting allegiances, and the inexorable march of new rulers who sought to erase the old symbols of power. And yet the crown remained, hidden beneath layers of earth and memory, patiently waiting for discovery. It is as though the earth itself recognized its importance, cradling it in soil that would protect it through centuries. Modern discovery brought astonishment. Archaeologists, digging carefully through layers of soil, came upon fragments of gold, glimmering faintly as they emerged from the shadows of time. Slowly, meticulously, the crown and accompanying treasures revealed themselves, telling a story not just of Visigothic kings but of the people who revered them, the artisans who created them, the land that both nurtured and swallowed them. Each piece recovered spoke of ritual, of ceremony, of a civilization's understanding of authority, faith, and permanence. The golden crown of Guarazar is not merely a symbol of monarchy, it is a lens through which the entire landscape of early medieval Spain can be glimpsed. It invites questions. How did faith shape governance? How did kingship intertwine with daily life, commerce, and artistry? How did artisans translate abstract spiritual ideas into objects of beauty, enduring yet ephemeral, delicate yet resolute? And how does the crown speak to us now, centuries later, when the Visigothic kingdoms are long gone but their echoes remain? When you stand before it, whether in the dim light of a museum display or through the lens of historical imagination, you feel the weight of continuity. The crown is both fragile and immortal. It survived fire and flood, conquest and neglect, human curiosity and human folly. It survived precisely because it was more than gold. It was a vessel of culture, of faith, of a civilization's attempt to anchor itself in permanence while recognizing the impermanence of all things. The jewels that glitter within its delicate filigree are not mere decoration. Each gem was chosen with intention, each placement a symbolic act. Sapphires for the heavens, garnets for protection, pearls for purity. These are not random choices. They are echoes of a worldview that saw material beauty as inseparable from spiritual meaning, that understood kingship as a duty both to people and to divine mandate. The crown is a compact manifesto of belief, encoded in gold, in stone, in curves that mimic the natural growth of the earth itself. And yet the crown also speaks of human vulnerability. Kings and rulers who wore such objects were mortal, their power contingent, their authority fragile. Wars claimed thrones, rebellion upended dynasties, and yet the crown outlasted them all. It reminds us that material things endure in ways people cannot, and that objects can bear witness when memory falters, when oral tradition fades, when empires vanish into dust. The earth gave it back because it remembered, and it reminds us to look, to listen, to consider the passage of time and the stories that survive it. To imagine the crown in its original setting is to envision ceremony. Perhaps it rested upon the head of a king during a coronation, the sunlight glinting off its surface as a priest intoned blessings, and the people murmured assent. Perhaps it was placed on an altar, surrounded by incense and chant, as offerings of grain, oil, and devotion were made. Perhaps it was hidden, carefully, in the aftermath of a siege, when survival demanded secrecy. Each scenario is plausible, each imbues the crown with layers of narrative, layers that history cannot fully resolve but that imagination can explore. Today, as we reflect on it, the crown reminds us of continuity and rupture. It reminds us that human ambition seeks permanence, yet all things must pass. It reminds us of the hands that crafted it, the rulers who sought to wield it, the people who revered it, the earth that protected it, and the centuries that kept it secret until we were ready to witness it. It is, in essence, a story of resilience, of beauty surviving neglect, of meaning enduring beyond the lifetimes of those who first imbued it with significance. When you trace the contours of its arches, when you study the arrangement of stones, when you imagine the crown upon the head of a long-forgotten king, you participate in that continuity. You are, in that moment, connected to a lineage of creation, reverence, concealment, and rediscovery. You are linked across centuries to artisans who labored in small, candlelit workshops, to kings who dreamed of eternity, to the earth that cradled it through storms of history, and to the archaeologists whose patience and care revealed it to the world. The crown teaches that history is not only written in words or recorded in chronicles. It exists in objects, in the silent testimony of craftsmanship, in the persistence of materials through time. It exists in the spaces between human attention and neglect, in the slow reclamation of what once seemed lost forever. To see the golden crown of Guarazar is to confront that delicate balance between presence and absence, between memory and oblivion, between the transient lives of humans and the enduring resonance of human creativity. It stands as a reminder that even in absence, there is significance. Even when kings fall, when empires dissolve, when names vanish from memory, the artifacts they leave behind carry forward fragments of their worlds. The crown grew from the earth, not because the soil nurtured it, but because it was once part of a civilization that knew the intertwined power of human hands and human belief. It grew in meaning over centuries, like roots slowly forcing their way through stone, unseen but inevitable. And so, the golden crown of Gwarazar remains, a silent sentinel of history, art, faith, and ambition. It is more than gold, more than jewels. It is a story in 3 dimensions, a testimony to the passage of time and the endurance of memory. It is a reminder that even the most earthly of objects can reach for the eternal, that beauty can survive chaos, that the earth can guard what human memory forgets, and that when we look upon such relics, we are, whether we know it or not, tracing the contours of our own humanity. The sword that shivered at dawn. There are swords that rust into silence, forgotten in the dark, their blades dulled, and their names lost. And then there are swords that do not simply exist as weapons, but breathe as legends, weaving themselves into the memory of nations. Among these, in Spain, there is one that stands apart, the sword of Tizona, the blade said to have belonged to Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, better known as El Cid, the knight whose life swayed between history and myth. Tizona is more than steel. It is more than a warrior's companion. It is a mirror, catching the gleam of dawn as kingdoms shifted, as wars erupted, as honor and betrayal walked hand in hand. To speak of Tizona is to step into a world of dust and sunlight, the ringing clash of metal, and the whispered prayers of men who carried banners into a horizon of fire. The name itself holds a weight that feels like a tremor through time. Tizona, derived from the word for firebrand, burns with imagery. Imagine a blade that does not simply cut but ignites, a sword not merely for battle, but for legacy, for the shaping of memory, for the creation of a figure whose shadow stretches across centuries. El Cid was not a king, nor the founder of a dynasty. He was something rarer, something that clings to the imagination long after royal lineages fade. He was a man who carved a legend from his deeds, a knight who rose and fell with fortune, who fought for Christian kings but also made uneasy alliances with Muslim rulers. His was a life lived in the tension of borders, where faith and politics blurred, where loyalty was both absolute and uncertain. Tizona was at his side, and in the stories told it shivered at dawn. Why at dawn? Because dawn is the moment of decision, the stillness before armies collide, the quiet when knights kneel in prayer, tightening their belts and whispering last words. Dawn is when the earth is caught between shadow and firelight, between what was and what will be. Tizona in these stories was said to strike terror, not merely because of its sharpness, but because it carried a presence. To see its edge gleam in the first light of morning was to feel fate closing in, to feel destiny tighten its grip. The chronicles speak of it as if it had a will. The medieval epic Cantar de Mioquid gives it voice, gives it power, gives it a place beyond the human hand that held it. El Cid carried more than one blade in the tales. Colada, another famed sword, was his too. But Tizona is the one that feels like it breathes with him, inseparable, eternal. And yet, for all the legend, Tizona is real. A sword exists, preserved across centuries, displayed in Spain, like a relic of myth made tangible. Its blade, forged with inscriptions, speaks of both devotion and mastery. Crafted not as a simple tool but as an extension of power, it bears the touch of hands who understood metallurgy not just as a science but as an art, as a form of invocation. The steel is more than steel, it is infused with symbols, prayers, words that once resonated with those who believed that objects could carry the divine. Think of the battles it may have seen, the rolling dust of the Iberian plains, the harsh clang of armored knights, the cries in languages that blended across cultures, Latin prayers, Arabic oaths, Castilian commands. El Cid's Spain was no singular land. It was fractured, complex, alive with competing kingdoms, Moorish and Christian, with alliances shifting like sand underfoot. In such a world, a sword was not merely a weapon, but a banner, a proclamation of identity, a mark of legitimacy. Tizona, in the imagination of Spain, carries both pride and unease. Pride in the strength and resilience of a knight who became the symbol of Castilian valor. Unease in the recognition that El Cid was not pure legend, but a man whose choices were pragmatic, whose loyalties were pragmatic, whose wars were fought in a world of constant flux. Tizona, then, is the distillation of contradiction, a weapon both of faith and necessity, of heroism and compromise. When you look upon it today, housed under glass, the sword seems to sleep. Its blade, aged but gleaming still, does not tremble, and yet, in imagination, in story, in the living current of myth, it continues to shiver at dawn, for dawn is eternal. It comes each day, reminding us of battles fought long ago, of decisions made in moments when the world seemed balanced on the edge of a blade. It is easy to think of swords as simple: steel, hilt, guard, a point designed to pierce or slash. But Tizona is not simple. Its balance speaks of the hand that held it. Its inscriptions speak of faith in a world of shifting belief. Its legend speaks of a people who needed heroes, who needed stories, who needed to weave the fragility of their kingdoms into the strength of a single warrior's blade. Some say the sword itself struck fear into the hearts of those who faced it, that even before El Cid raised his arm, the sight of Tizona gleaming in the light of dawn sent men trembling. Was it the steel, or was it the legend that grew around it? Perhaps both. Perhaps the blade was merely sharp, and it was El Cid himself who made it terrible. Or perhaps objects do carry the weight of those who wield them. Perhaps steel can absorb history. Perhaps dawn light can still make it shiver with memory. It survived centuries because it was too significant to be lost, passed down, preserved, fought over in inheritance disputes, kept as a treasure when kings and dukes vanished, when dynasties shifted. Tizona endured because legend ensured it could not vanish. To lose Tizona would be to lose more than metal. It would be to lose a strand of identity, a symbol of continuity, a fragment of Spain's own self-understanding. And so, in the halls where it rests today, people stand before it in silence. They do not kneel, but they feel the urge to. They do not pray, but they feel reverence. For Tizona is not just a sword, it is a reminder that legend can step out of poetry into the tangible, that myth can leave fingerprints on steel, that the dawns of the past still echo in the present. To speak its name is to summon images of dust rising in the morning light, of banners lifting in the wind, of knights tightening their grips as the world held its breath, the sword that shivered at dawn, not because the steel trembled, but because those who saw it felt the tremor of history, the quiver of destiny, the shiver of mortality. And perhaps if you stood upon those same fields today, at dawn, in the silence before the sun breaks fully upon the earth, you might imagine you hear it still, a faint vibration, a whisper of steel unsheathed, a breath of a blade that has not forgotten. Tizona waits, as dawn always waits, as history always waits, as the past shivers eternally into the present. The stone that refused to fall. The story of the Thunderstone begins not with stone, but with silence, the kind of silence that gathers when men and mountains measure one another. In the damp breath of the Russian north, where the Volga winds twist like uncoiled ropes and birch forests lean into fog, legends tell of a rock too vast for men, too stubborn for time, too heavy even for gravity itself. The people of Novgorod whispered of it in half belief, half fear, calling it the Thunderstone. For when storms crossed the wide flat plains, it was said lightning struck upon it first, and thunder answered from its flanks as though the sky itself had bent low to speak into stone. But even before history pinned it with a name, it had lain there for centuries, for millennia, older than the cities that would one day raise walls against invaders, older even than the rivers that now carve their silver paths across the land. To speak of the Thunderstone is to speak of the endurance of matter itself, and of the impossible will of men who thought to command it. The tale begins, as many tales of Russia do, with Peter the Great. He dreamed of a city that would face the west as boldly as it faced the east. A city built not on the weary bones of history but upon a new foundation. St. Petersburg was his dream, a city of stone and water, of canals like veins and palaces rising out of swamps. But dreams once sown grow roots into the soil, and Peter's successors sought to make them permanent with monuments that would bind the city to legend. So Catherine the Great, Empress and architect of empire, resolved to raise a statue of Peter unlike any the world had seen. The sculptor Falconet was chosen, his hands eager to shape bronze into motion, his mind already leaning toward the image of a rider astride a rearing horse, a man commanding both beast and destiny. Yet for such a statue there must be a pedestal, and not just any stone would do. A base fit for an emperor would need to be as colossal as the vision it was to uphold. So began the search for a monolith worthy of Peter. Across marshes and forests, word traveled that near the village of Lakhta, half sunk in the earth like a ship swallowed by mud, there lay a boulder too vast to be anything but fate. Villagers said it had fallen from the heavens. Some whispered it was a fragment of the world before the flood, cast down when the waters withdrew. Others muttered that Perun, god of thunder, had hurled it at the earth in anger, and it had remained lodged there ever since. To touch it was to feel its pulse, to climb it was to feel small before eternity. Catherine heard these tales not as superstitions but as summons. If Peter's image was to endure, it would stand upon the back of this Thunderstone, a marriage of ruler and rock, empire and earth. But the problem remained: how does one move a mountain? The stone was no ordinary boulder. By measure it was over 20 meters long, more than 12 meters wide, and nearly 8 meters tall. By weight, it pressed the ground with an estimated 1,500 tons, a weight beyond imagination in the 18th century. Engineers shook their heads. Wagons would break, horses would founder, ice might carry it. But the path from Lakhta to St. Petersburg was swamp and forest, not a frozen highway. To consider moving it was madness. Yet Catherine decreed it must be done. In her vision, impossibility was but another form of obedience. The task fell to a surf engineer named Marinos Carburis, a man of Greek origin, whose genius lay in patience and stubborn innovation. Where others sought force, he sought leverage. He designed an apparatus of metal spheres, bronze balls rolling in grooved tracks beneath the stone. In this he mimicked the planets themselves, the way heaven moves with the least friction through the void. With each shift, the thunderstone rolled forward, slow as a glacier, deliberate as destiny. Hundreds of men strained at ropes. Timber creaked. Iron groaned. The earth itself seemed to protest. But inch by inch, meter by meter, the impossible began to move. Imagine the sight: peasants in rough homespun, tugging ropes slick with frost, oxen lowing in harness, engineers shouting commands against the roar of winter winds. The stone crawled across the land like some ancient beast stirred from slumber. Forests were felled to clear its passage. Roads were laid only to be consumed by its progress. Villagers gathered at crossroads to gape as the thunderstone moved past, their icons clutched in trembling hands. Some crossed themselves in fear, for was it not written that those who disturb the gifts of the gods invite their wrath? Others knelt in awe, whispering that to see it was to glimpse the end of the world, when earth and sky would trade places. All the while the stone groaned against the rollers, an earth voice, deep and slow, reminding all who heard that this was no ordinary cargo. For months the journey continued. When ground failed, the engineers built. When swamps threatened to swallow the stone, platforms of timber were laid, rising like rafts above the muck. When rivers blocked the way, bridges were raised. Every obstacle was answered not with despair, but with invention. As though the thunderstone demanded new ingenuity at each step. Men who had never traveled beyond their villages now marched in the company of a legend. Fires at night burned along the route, and beside them workers slept beneath the shadow of the stone, their dreams filled with thunder and horses and the gaze of emperors. At last, the Gulf of Finland was reached. Here the stone was loaded onto a massive barge, a vessel crafted only for this one purpose. Chains bit into its flanks, pulleys screamed, men hauled until blood streaked their palms. When at last it settled upon the barge, the waterline dipped perilously close to drowning, yet the sea held. The thunderstone floated, as though consenting to its journey, as though amused to be cradled by waves. And so across the gulf it sailed, attended by ships like an emperor at sea, the largest stone ever moved by human hands, born not by gods, but by peasants, serfs, and the stubborn will of a foreign engineer. In St. Petersburg, crowds gathered as the barge neared shore. They had heard of the stone, now they saw it with their own eyes, an island of rock rising from the sea, a monument before the monument. Streets filled with spectators as the thunderstone crawled through the city, its passage echoing like thunder between palaces and canals. Finally, in Senate Square, it was set in place. Falconet's bronze rider was raised upon it, Peter astride his rearing horse, his hand outstretched toward the horizon. Thus was born the Bronze Horseman, one of the great monuments of Russia, and beneath it, the Thunderstone, the pedestal of empire, the stone that refused to fall. But legend did not end with triumph. Some said the Thunderstone was restless, that it would not be bound to human ambition forever. When the statue was unveiled, lightning is said to have struck nearby, as if the heavens protested this theft of their thunder. During the Great Flood of 1824, waters rose to the very base of the statue, and people whispered that the sea sought to reclaim the stone. When revolutions shook Russia, eyes turned again to Senate Square. Could the Thunderstone bear witness to the fall of empires as well as their rise? Some swore that in storms, the rock still rumbled, echoing with the voice of Perun, the old thunder god, who watched silently as men and rulers rose and fell from its flanks. The Thunderstone became a symbol not just of engineering or empire, but of endurance. Through war, famine, revolution, and siege, it remained. Cannon fire shook the city during the Second World War, but the stone endured without a crack. Bombs fell, buildings burned, but beneath the bronze rider, the Thunderstone stood as it had stood for millennia, immovable, indifferent, eternal. Generations of Russians passed through the square, their eyes lifting not only to the bronze figure above, but to the vast pedestal below, for they knew the rider would one day be remembered as legend, but the stone would remain. What is a monument but the marriage of vision and matter? And what is matter but memory pressed into form? The Thunderstone is both. It is the dream of Catherine, the ambition of Falconet, the sweat of nameless laborers, and the silence of a rock born in glacial ages, carried by ice from Karelia, deposited in mud, long before men walked the land. It is at once myth and geology, the hammer of gods and the patience of earth. To stand before it is to feel small, to sense that in its shadow, time itself moves differently, slowly, like the groaning of stone against rollers, like the deep murmur of thunder beyond the horizon. In every age, people have sought permanence, a way to defy the tide of years. Temples crumble, statues topple, empires vanish. Yet the Thunderstone remains, for it was never carved by man, only moved by him. Its endurance is not the achievement of empire, but the patience of earth. And so long as it stands in Senate Square, beneath the rider who points forever toward the distance, It will remind all who see it of the stubborn dream of Catherine, the impossible vision of Falconet, and the anonymous hands of those who dragged a mountain across mud and swamp. It will remind them too that stone outlives ambition, that silence outlasts thunder, and that some things in this world simply refuse to fall. And perhaps, when storms gather over St. Petersburg and lightning forks across the Neva, those who stand before the bronze horseman may still hear the faintest echo rolling from the pedestal itself, not the crack of sky, but the growl of the thunderstone, ancient and patient, reminding the city that though men command and rulers decree, stone remembers and stone endures, always refusing, always waiting, always unfallen. The cup that promised the sea. There are objects in history that command awe by their size, their glittering material, their connection to kings and conquerors, crowns crusted with jewels, weapons forged in fire, tombs raised to scrape the heavens. But then there are smaller relics, those that seem almost modest, quiet, simple at first glance, and yet they carry in their stillness a weight that no crown can rival. One such relic is a carved stone vessel, unearthed in the northern reaches of Scotland, a land where the sea forever presses against the edge of human life. It is called the Cup of the Pyx, though the people who carved it left no clear record of its purpose, and perhaps that is fitting, for like the Pyx themselves, it whispers in symbols, in riddles, in silence more powerful than any explanation. It is not the cup of a king, it is not a goblet of war, it is not a vessel of wine or ale, it is something stranger, something older, something bound to the sea in ways both literal and imagined. It is the cup that promised the sea, and in that promise lies a story deeper than waves and longer than memory. The Pyx were a people without a written language, at least not one that survives. What we know of them comes from the accounts of outsiders, often enemies, who described them as painted warriors, fierce and strange, their bodies marked in blue, their customs unknowable. Rome clashed with them and feared them. Later chroniclers dismissed them or folded them into legend. Yet their stones remain, carved with symbols that no scholar has ever translated. Circles within circles, beasts both real and imagined, mirror signs and keys and crescents. They are like an alphabet glimpsed from the corner of the eye, familiar and alien at once, a language denied to us by time. Among these marks, scattered across the land, the cup of the Pyx was found. Unlike the great stones that cannot be moved, this object could be carried, and that makes its mystery all the more intimate, for it was meant to be touched, lifted, used. But used for what? At first glance, the cup is plain, carved from a block of stone, smoothed by tools and later by centuries of handling. Its size fits comfortably in two hands. Its surface is cool and steady, yet the more one studies it, the more strange it becomes. The interior is worn in such a way that it suggests not ale or milk or grain, but water, and not just water, but brine. Microscopic traces hint at salt, as though the vessel had long contact with the sea itself. That discovery deepens the puzzle. Why would a people known for their stone-carving skills, their wild battle markings, their defiance of empire, shape a vessel meant for salt water? You cannot drink it, you cannot feed a family from it, and yet it was preserved, it was revered, and in its reverence lies a story. Some scholars argue that it was a ritual object, a tool for ceremony. When a voyage was planned, the clan would gather by the shore. The leader, or perhaps a seer, would kneel at the edge of the tide and dip the cup into the surf. Then they would raise it high, holding it up to the horizon or the stars. In that act, the sea itself was consulted. If the waves calmed, if the air stilled, the voyage would be blessed. If the surf rose and the wind whipped, the sea had refused them. In this way the cup was a mediator, a mouthpiece between mortals and the ocean's will. To refuse its message was unthinkable. To honor it was survival. Others suggest it was a vessel of mourning. When warriors were lost to the sea, drowned in storms, slain on raids, or vanished without return, their families gathered. Salt water, symbolic of tears, was poured into the cup. Sometimes the cup was set upon a stone, left to evaporate under the sky, as if the dead themselves would drink from the air. Sometimes it was poured back into the tide, a gift to the waves that had taken what they would not return. In this telling, the cup was not just an object, but a bridge between grief and acceptance, a way of giving form to the endlessness of loss. But there are darker stories too. Folk tales, whispered in later centuries, speak of the cup as a test. Before a young warrior could claim his place among the fighting men, he was brought to the sea. The cup was filled with brine. He had to drink it in front of the clan, proving that he could take the bitterness of the ocean into himself, that he would not falter in storms or bleed weakness before the tide. Those who gagged or refused were shamed. Those who drank and endured were given weapons and painted marks, their names woven into the clan's memory. It was not wine that christened them, but salt, the sea itself becoming part of their blood. Even now, when historians speak of the Pyx, there is unease. The cup of the pyx in particular creates an atmosphere difficult to explain. It is small, but when placed in a museum case, it draws the eye more than larger treasures. Visitors linger before it longer than before golden torques or gleaming swords. Something about its simplicity feels heavier than gold. Light behaves strangely around it, as if reluctant to leave its hollow. Shadows pool in its basin even when the room is brightly lit, as though the vessel drinks not only water, but illumination. Some who have touched it during study describe the faint scent of the sea clinging to their hands afterward, though the artifact has not been near the shore in centuries. Others claim to hear, in the silence surrounding it, the low pulse of waves on rock. Whether these are imagination or something else, no one can say. The cup is part of a wider enigma, the Pictish relationship with the sea. Their carved stones often depict circles that could be moons, wheels, or whirlpools. Animals recur: fish, serpents, seabirds, horses that might in truth be kelpies, the dangerous water spirits of later Scottish lore. Perhaps the cup was part of this same symbolic language, a practical tool transfigured into a sign of power. The sea fed them and killed them, bore them to new lands and carried enemies to their shores. To tame it was impossible. To speak with it, perhaps possible, and if possible then necessary. Legends that cling to the cup speak of journeys guided by it. One tells of a chief who carried the vessel across storm-racked waters. Each night he dipped it into the tide, lifted it to the sky, and listened. On the final night, the waves themselves seemed to bend, opening a path of calm through chaos. His ship alone survived. Another tells of the cup being broken, or nearly so. A rival tribe tried to smash it on the rocks, but though cracks spread across its surface, the vessel did not shatter. They cast it into the sea, but weeks later it washed ashore where the Picts had first carved it, whole once more. Whether myth or memory, these tales tie the cup to survival, to endurance, to a pact between people and ocean. It is tempting, when we hear such stories, to imagine that the cup must have been beautiful once, that it gleamed, that it bore carvings now lost. But perhaps its power lay in its starkness. In an age of ornament, the plain vessel speaks more loudly. It does not distract, it does not gild. It is a hollow, a void, a silence waiting to be filled. And silence, like the sea, can be more powerful than noise. The cup of the Picts reminds us that not all treasures are obvious. Gold tarnishes, jewels fracture, empires collapse. But stone endures, and symbols carved in it can outlast languages. The Picts chose to speak in riddles, to mark their world in ways that defy the neat categories of later civilizations. Their cup is part of that choice. It will never explain itself, it will never yield to translation, and perhaps that is the point. For what is a promise, if not something that remains unfulfilled, always reaching forward, always pulling you onward, like a horizon you can never touch? The sea does not belong to us. It cannot be owned, only courted, feared, respected. The cup of the Picts is a reminder of that truth. It is not a chalice of kingship or conquest. It is not a weapon of power or a record of rule. It is a humble vessel, and yet through it we glimpse an entire worldview, one in which water is as sacred as land, where the ocean is a god, and where silence speaks louder than words. So when we name it the cup that promised the sea, we acknowledge its paradox. It promises, but promises nothing certain. It holds, but holds nothing permanent. It speaks, but only in waves and tides. It is both object and omen, both vessel and void. It is a relic of people long gone, and yet when you look upon it, when you imagine lifting it in the hush of twilight, when you feel the weight of stone filled with the weight of salt water, you understand why they carved it, why they carried it, why they listened to it. For in that moment, the cup is not empty, it is full of mystery, of memory, of the sea itself, forever promising, and forever beyond reach. The tablet that taught the stars. Long before telescopes traced the paths of planets, before compasses drew lines across seas, before the written word was copied in endless volumes, there was a tablet, not carved in stone, not cut from granite, but written on fragile papyrus, the plant that grew by the waters of the Nile. It was born in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, a time when pyramids were already ancient, when gods still walked in painted temples, and when the night sky was more than a ceiling of darkness. It was a library of signs, a teacher of destinies. The papyrus came from the town of Kahun, a settlement built for the workers who raised the pyramid of Pharaoh Senusret II. And though it was a workers' town, modest and planned, what was left behind in its dust was no simple scrap of writing. Among the fragments of accounts, of household records, of medical instructions, there lay a text that scholars would one day call a treasure of the heavens. It was not merely a papyrus, it was a map of meaning, a key to the cosmos, a teacher of stars. The Kahun papyrus is delicate, but its words have endured like echoes in the desert wind. What it reveals is astonishing. Early calculations of the moon's phases, records of eclipses, instructions on how to align temples with celestial markers. It whispers of a time when priests of Egypt looked upward not just in devotion, but in study. To them the sky was not empty, it was alive. Each star had a role, each movement a message. They believed the gods had written their intentions in the heavens, and to read those intentions was to participate in divine knowledge. The papyrus, then, was no mere manual, it was scripture in motion. Imagine, in a chamber lit by oil lamps, a priest bending over this scroll. His reed pen touches the papyrus, ink flowing like the dark river outside. He marks down symbols for stars, notes of their risings and settings, the names of constellations now long forgotten. Outside, the workers' town sleeps, children curl beside their mothers, builders dream of stone, but inside this room, the priest is awake with the stars. He dips the pen again, recording what the sky has told him. When Sirius, the star of Isis, will rise, when the Nile's flood will come, when the shadow of the moon will cover the sun. He is teaching, but not from himself. He is copying the lessons of the cosmos. The papyrus is his slate, the sky his teacher. Centuries later, the papyrus lay buried in silence. The village of Kahun emptied, its houses abandoned. Time passed, sand crept into doorways, walls crumbled. The papyrus, fragile as it was, endured. Wrapped and left behind, it survived by chance, or perhaps by design, as though the stars themselves wished to preserve their script. It was not until the 19th century, when archaeologists combed through the forgotten town, that the papyrus was recovered. When the fragments were unrolled, they revealed more than words, they revealed a civilization's memory of the heavens. What makes the papyrus so strange is not only its survival, but its depth, for within its fibers are calculations that suggest an understanding of cycles far beyond mere observation. Eclipses do not happen at random, they follow patterns, and the papyrus hints that the ancient Egyptians had already begun to grasp those patterns. The rising of Sirius predicted the flood, but more than that, it tied the rhythm of heaven to the survival of earth. To plant too early or too late was to risk famine. To align temples wrongly was to dishonor the gods. The papyrus was not theoretical, it was practical, vital, sacred. Scholars argue over its exact meaning. Some claim it is purely medical, that it prescribes treatments tied to lunar phases, the humors of the body bound to the humors of the sky. Others insist it is astronomical, a handbook for priests to know when to hold festivals, when to declare holy days, when to guide the king's rituals, and still others see in it astrology, the beginnings of the idea that the stars influence human fate. The truth may be all three, for in Egypt the body, the heavens, and the soul were never separate. To treat the sick was to align them with cosmic harmony. To read the stars was to heal the land. To heal the land was to serve the gods. The papyrus is damaged, yet what remains suggests a worldview at once immense and intimate. It speaks of the goddess Nut, the sky who swallows the sun each evening, and gives birth to it each dawn. It speaks of Ra's daily journey across the heavens, of Thoth, who records the passage of time, of Osiris, who lies beyond Orion's belt. Each god a constellation, each constellation a god. To read the papyrus is to glimpse this sacred geography, and within it lies a paradox. The Egyptians studied the stars with rigor, yet for them science was not separate from religion. The temple was the observatory, the priest the astronomer, the myth the equation, and so the Kahun papyrus became not just an artifact, but a doorway. Through it we see how the ancients wove together threads we have since divided. For us, the stars are matter, spheres of gas, distances measured in light years. For them, the stars were meaning, souls of gods, signs of time, messages from eternity. Both views are true, but the papyrus reminds us of the other truth, the one we have nearly forgotten. Stories cling to the papyrus like dust to stone. Later traditions say that the priests who used it could foretell eclipses with such accuracy that people believed they commanded the sun itself. Some whispered that the papyrus contained forbidden spells, charms that could draw down the stars to earth, bind them in words, and bend their influence. Others insisted it was not written by men at all, but dictated by Thoth, the ibis-headed lord of wisdom who measured the heavens with his divine pen. And when the papyrus was hidden in the abandoned town, it was because its knowledge was too powerful, too dangerous to leave in careless hands. Whether these tales are true or not, they speak to the aura of the papyrus. Even in fragments, it radiates presence. Those who have seen it behind glass remark that the ink still looks alive, as though written yesterday. The symbols seem to shift under the eye, patterns rising and falling like constellations emerging at dusk. Some claim that in its presence they felt a hush, a silence not of emptiness but of waiting, as if the papyrus still listens for the stars, still holds lessons not yet read. The Kahun papyrus is a survivor, but also a teacher. It teaches us that knowledge can be fragile, that wisdom can vanish, and that silence often hides more than words reveal. The pyramids are mighty, but it is the thin strip of papyrus, easily torn, that carried the mind of Egypt into eternity. And perhaps that is fitting, for the stars themselves are fragile in our sight, tiny, flickering, as if they might vanish with the wind. Yet they endure, and so too does the papyrus. To call it the tablet that taught the stars is both metaphor and truth. It taught the priests who wrote upon it. It teaches us now as we decipher its lines. But more than that, it teaches humility, that the universe is vast, and our grasp of it always partial, always fragile, like ink on papyrus. We are students forever, gazing upward, marking down signs, trying to read the lessons of the sky. The jewel that carried night. They say that some stones do not belong wholly to the earth, that they carry in their depths the shimmer of another realm, as though they were not carved by hands of men, but shaped by the slow breathing of the cosmos itself. Among them one has long stood apart, the sapphire that the world came to call the Star of India, at more than 500 carats, and with a radiant star that glides across its surface as though it were a fragment of the firmament caught in stone. It remains both a treasure and a mystery. Yet behind its polished face lies not only beauty, but a tale that stretches from the jungles of ancient Sri Lanka to the glass-lit halls of New York, across shrines, palaces, ships, thieves' pockets, and myths that reach beyond the grasp of time. The first stories of the jewel are not of miners or merchants but of priests. Sri Lanka's highlands have always held rivers that whisper and sands that sparkle, where sapphires are found not in great veins of rock but in ancient riverbeds, where the earth has washed its secrets for millennia. It was here, in the folds of the Ratnapura region, the so-called City of Gems, that villagers once believed gods had walked barefoot, their steps pressing fire and starlight into the soil. Generations would sift these waters, pulling up smooth pebbles, some dull, some gleaming, and among them, once in some uncounted century past, came a rough blue-gray stone, unlike the others, heavy, larger than a fist, and bearing strange threads of white light running through its flesh. It seemed not of mud and water, but of the heavens. Local lore holds that the stone was first carried not to a jeweler, but to a temple. There, monks watched as lamplight bent across its surface, revealing a glowing six-rayed star that appeared to float atop the gem, sliding with every movement of flame. They called it not a sapphire, but the eye of Vishnu, believing it to hold the watch of the gods. It was said that if the star turned dark, calamity would follow, but when it glowed, kings would be safe upon their thrones. For centuries, it may have rested in such sanctuaries, hidden within reliquaries of bronze and wood, brought out during rituals under the full moon, when chants filled the air and the smell of camphor burned. No record survives with certainty, only fragments of story that cling like moss to the stone's long journey. The geology of its wonder only adds to its myth. Sapphires form under immense heat and pressure, deep beneath mountains thrust up by ancient seas. What makes the Star of India unlike most is the fine needles of rutile, aligned perfectly within, that catch and scatter light into a star, a phenomenon called asterism. To those who first gazed upon it, such words were unknown. All they knew was that within its cloudy depths the heavens themselves seemed to have nested. It did not glitter like a diamond, or gleam with fire like a ruby. Instead, it carried something calmer, more eternal, the pale shimmer of a night sky, undimmed by cloud or smoke. By the medieval age, Sri Lanka's gems had become legendary across the seas. Arab traders carried tales of stones that shone like moons and fetched them across the Indian Ocean to markets of Basra and Baghdad. Venetian travelers wrote of Ceylon as a place where treasures grew from the ground, more precious than spices or silks. Whether the Star of India itself traveled these routes, no one can say, but whispers of a sapphire the size of an egg, holding a star within, appear in fragments of Persian poetry and Indian court inventories. Was it the same stone? Perhaps, or perhaps the legends of one sapphire bled into another, as stories so often do when wonder outpaces memory. In some accounts, a great sapphire adorned the crown of a southern Indian king, said to protect him in battle, its star shifting whenever danger approached. In others, it was given as tribute to a visiting emperor, vanishing into the vaults of Delhi or Agra. Yet sapphires are slippery things in history, moving from hand to hand as war, gift, theft, and trade all left their mark. The Star of India, if indeed it was this same jewel, may have seen temples burn, kings fall, and ports change banners, always hidden in the shadows of history, until another age drew it forth. The colonial era brought Europe's relentless hunger for treasures. Ceylon, under British rule, became a jewel box exploited for its riches. Mines deepened, exports swelled, and Western collectors hungered for stones that would dazzle salons and cabinets of curiosity. It was likely in this period, in the 19th century, that the Star of India entered the documented record. Carved and polished into the domed cabochon we know today, it emerged as one of the largest star sapphires ever cut. its pale gray-blue body glowing with that ghostly star centered with uncanny perfection. To the lapidaries who handled it, it must have seemed almost alive, responding to the slightest shift of light, as though it carried breath. By the late 1800s, the gem came into the orbit of financiers and collectors who sought not only wealth but wonder. Chief among them was J.P. Morgan, the American magnate whose appetite for rare stones rivaled his appetite for railroads and banks. With the help of gem expert George Kunz, Morgan assembled a collection meant to outshine all others, a treasury of the Earth's marvels. Into this collection, the Star of India was drawn, alongside emeralds from Colombia, rubies from Burma, and diamonds from Africa. It was less a jewel for a crown than a jewel for eternity, too vast and strange to be worn, too sacred seeming to be mounted. In 1900, much of Morgan's collection was donated to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. There, within vaulted halls of stone and glass, the Star of India became an object not of worship but of display. Visitors stared through cases, their own reflections mingling with the shimmer of its star. For many, it was the first time they had seen such a thing, a stone that seemed to hold night itself, unmoving yet alive. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Scholars wrote of its perfection. Mystics whispered that it was not chance but destiny that had brought such a stone to the heart of a new empire across the sea. Yet even in the sterile safety of museums, the stone's story was not without drama. In 1964, the Star of India was stolen in one of the most audacious jewel heists of the century. A trio of thieves, exploiting lax security and a disabled alarm battery, slipped into the museum at night and vanished with gems worth millions. Among them was the Star of India. Spirited away into the dark streets of Manhattan, for days the world buzzed with the loss, as though the night sky itself had been torn from its place. Yet fortune, or perhaps the stone's own will, brought it back. Within weeks, police recovered the sapphire in a bus station locker in Miami. Unlike many treasures that vanish forever, the Star of India returned, almost untouched, as though it had merely taken a brief walk through shadow. Today it rests again in New York, under the careful watch of curators, its glow undiminished by centuries. But even here, behind bulletproof glass, it is more than a mineral. For some, it is a survivor, having passed through temples, courts, empires, and theft. For others, it is a talisman, its star a reminder that light can be carried within stone. To scientists, it is an unmatched specimen of asterism, proof of nature's artistry. To poets and dreamers, it remains what it always was, a fragment of night held in the palm of the earth. Legends cling to it still. Some say the stone grants protection to whoever owns it, that no harm can befall its keeper unless the star itself dims. Others believe it whispers warnings in dreams, guiding its guardians away from misfortune. Even now, visitors often remark on a strange calm when standing before it, as though the stone radiates not just beauty but presence. Whether such feelings are born of suggestion or of something older, deeper, no one can truly say. Yet perhaps its greatest power lies not in superstition but in continuity. For thousands of years humans have looked at the night sky with longing, seeing in its stars both destiny and mystery. To hold a star in stone is to bridge heaven and earth, to bring the unreachable close. The Star of India, in its silence, carries that bridge. It is the sky made tangible, the infinite cradled in the finite. And so it waits, as it has waited for ages, unmoving yet alive, a jewel that has crossed oceans, kingdoms, and centuries. The Star of India is more than a sapphire. It is the night itself, condensed into crystal, a reminder that some secrets of the universe choose to dwell not in the heavens above, but in the stones beneath our feet. The coin that sang in silence. Before there were coins stamped with the faces of emperors, before golden auri clinked in the purses of Roman senators, there was silence. A silence not of wealth but of weight. In the hills and valleys of Italy, long before Rome carved its name into history, men and women traded not with delicate discs but with rough, heavy lumps of metal. They called them as rude, raw bronze, uneven, unshaped, silent except for the dull thud they made when placed upon a stone or counter. And yet, within those mute masses, the voice of a civilization was beginning to stir. Picture the Italian peninsula around the 8th or 7th century BCE. Villages clung to hilltops for safety, fields stretched between rivers, and trade was life. Farmers grew barley, olives and grapes. Shepherds drove flocks through valleys. Artisans shaped clay pots, carved bone tools, and hammered bronze blades. But how to exchange fairly? Grain could rot, livestock could wander, promises could be broken. What endured, what held value across distance and time, was metal, bronze in particular. It was the alloy of strength, born of copper and tin, forged in fire, that demanded skill and patience. Bronze could make axes to cut trees, blades to defend, vessels to store, and so lumps of it, irregular, cast, broken, or even poured into molds and shattered, became the earliest currency of Rome's ancestors. Not coins as we know them, but pieces of promise. A shepherd could weigh out bronze for a jar of oil, a farmer for a measure of wine, an artisan for a new tool. The bronze itself mattered less for shape than for substance. It was value embodied in weight. Imagine these exchanges. A man lays down a jagged chunk of metal, green with age, heavier than a stone of similar size. The trader brings out his scales, balances it against small weights, nods, and the deal is struck. The bronze is rough, silent, without symbols or inscriptions, and yet it carries meaning. It sings in silence, because all who see it know what it represents: work, time, necessity. Archaeologists today find these lumps scattered across Italy, buried in hoards, hidden in graves, left in sanctuaries. Some weigh a few grams, others several pounds. Their shapes are strange: nuggets, bars, even flattened cakes. They are not beautiful, not adorned, but in their silence lies their truth. These were the building blocks of commerce, the first whispers of a system that would one day command the world. It is tempting to think of Rome as beginning with armies, but before the legions marched, bronze was already binding lives together. The Etruscans to the north, the Latins of the central hills, the Sabines, Samnites, and others, each used bronze not only for tools and weapons, but for exchange. Baize rood was not merely money, it was survival you could hold. And yet, even in this crude form, it carried symbolism. Bronze was not easy to come by. Copper and tin had to be mined, sometimes far from where they were smelted, and transported through trade routes. To hold a lump of baize rood was to hold the memory of mountains, rivers, and furnaces, to hold the labor of miners who descended into darkness, of smiths who bent over fire, of traders who risked travel across dangerous lands. Each lump was a story condensed into silence. Over time, the system evolved. People began casting baize rood into more regular shapes: ingots, rods, discs. These became baize sinacom, signed bronze, marked with designs of cattle, eagles, and other symbols of value. But in the beginning, there was no sign. The coin that sang in silence was mute, rough, anonymous. It asked for trust, and trust gave it voice. Legends even attach themselves to this early bronze. Roman tradition speaks of the first kings, like Numa Pompilius, who was said to establish laws of exchange. Some tales whisper that before Rome minted coins, bronze lumps were weighed in temples, blessed by priests of Jupiter, ensuring that trade itself was sacred. Whether myth or truth, the connection between metal and divine order lingered, as if wealth was not merely an earthly measure, but one touched by gods. To picture baize rood is to imagine a world still half in shadow, before the shine of stamped currency. A farmer's rough hands, dirt under nails, clutching a lump that might secure his family's food through winter. A merchant in a bustling market, weighing bronze by lamplight, his eyes sharp for fraud. A priest receiving offerings at an altar, the dull clink of metal joining the smoke of sacrifice. No emperor's face, no motto, no artistry, only weight and silence, and within them, the faint hum of civilization taking form, and that silence, heavy, patient, was the beginning of Rome's long conversation with money, power, and time. The baize rood was crude, but in it lay the seed of a system that would one day span empires. Its voice was quiet, but it was a voice nonetheless, singing not with words but with presence, with permanence, with the undeniable truth that value could be carried in the palm of a hand. The coin that sang in silence did not glitter, did not dazzle. It was not meant to impress but to endure, and in enduring it became the hidden heartbeat of a world that had not yet learned to stamp kings upon metal. For in its silence it taught men to listen, to wait, to fairness, to trust. And those lessons would echo through centuries. The silence of the coin is deceptive, for silence itself often carries more weight than sound. When the first Romans shaped rough lumps of bronze into value, they were shaping not just commerce but also memory. Bronze, unlike flesh, endures. Unlike wood, it resists rot. And unlike song or speech which fade upon the wind, bronze lingers, heavy, refusing to be forgotten. Each chunk, each uneven surface of baize rood was a kind of silent pact, between giver and taker, between families, between clans. But silence, as Rome grew, began to sing. At first it was faint, like the whisper of a plucked string carried through the marketplace. Bronze passed from hand to hand, and with each exchange, something intangible was carried along with it: trust, obligation, promise. These lumps of metal bore no faces of kings, no declarations of empire, no gods struck upon them. They were humble, mute weights of value, and yet they taught Rome how to count, how to reckon, how to measure one life against another, one transaction against the next. The sound grew louder as Rome expanded. Merchants weighed baize rood against scales, the clink of bronze on bronze echoing beneath wooden market awnings. Farmers arrived with bundles of olives, sacks of grain, goats tethered by twine. In return they received bronze. Not ornament, not beauty, but utility. Bronze bought space in a neighbor's barn, a jar of salted fish from the coast, a piece of pottery baked in a kiln that smoked beneath the summer sun. In silence, bronze bound them. And then came the streets. Rome was never quiet. The shuffle of sandals over stones, the creak of wagons, the shouts of water sellers and hawkers, the bray of donkeys, the hammer striking at an anvil, but beneath it all, in pockets and purses, the dull, heavy silence of bronze rode along. This silence was not empty, it was anticipation. The silence before an agreement, before a price was spoken, before one hand extended to another. Rome was learning to trust in something beyond barter, learning that weight itself could speak. The coin, if one may call it that, sang softly in the way of absence. No emblem, no face, no text. Unlike later coins that would trumpet their rulers' names, the ace rude said nothing. Its silence was its democracy. It did not care if you were rich or poor, soldier or shepherd, noblewoman or enslaved laborer. It weighed the same in every palm. And in that equality of measure, it carried a kind of justice, perhaps the first Rome had ever known. Yet silence is fragile. Over time, voices intruded. Rulers began to see the power of this silent bronze, and wished to make it speak in their names. From ace rude came ace signatum, bronze slabs marked with designs. Later came ace graph, round cast coins stamped with images of gods, symbols of authority, faces of men. The silence was broken. Value was no longer just weight, but proclamation. A coin no longer simply exchanged goods. It declared allegiance, it bore propaganda, it sang of power. But the memory of silence never vanished. In the crevices of Rome's foundations, archaeologists today uncover lumps of ace rude, green with patina, jagged in form. Holding one is like holding the pause before history found its voice. Each irregular surface is a frozen silence that once traveled through crowded markets, across the fields of Latium, beside the Tiber's waters. And so the question lingers, what did silence mean to those who carried it? Did they sense that they were participating in the birth of something vast? Or did they only see lumps of bronze, heavy in their palms, exchanged for bread and salt? Perhaps silence never sang to them at all. Perhaps the song is only heard now, in retrospect, when the noise of history has grown so deafening that only silence feels remarkable. For in Rome's later centuries, coins clattered endlessly. Silver denarii bore the faces of emperors, each trying to shout louder than the last, declaring victories, proclaiming divinity, immortalizing themselves in metal. They flooded markets, they crossed seas, they spread to distant provinces, but amid that roar, the humble is rude, mute, weighty, anonymous, remains a reminder of the beginning. It whispers that before empire, before conquest, before the Caesars and their marble, Rome was built on silence, the silence of trust, of exchange, of rough bronze singing in the absence of words. And if you close your eyes, if you let your breath steady, you may almost hear it, the quiet clink of lumps being weighed, the murmured agreement of two farmers in the marketplace, the shifting of a bronze piece from one calloused hand to another. The song is there, not in noise but in stillness, the coin that sang in silence, binding strangers, birthing a city, and teaching an empire that value itself could be forged in weight, in trust, in quiet. The silence endures. The crown that split the moon. They say that a crown is a circle, unbroken, endless, a sign of rule without flaw or end. Yet in the land of Baekje, long before Korea became the Korea we know, there was a crown unlike any other, a crown that seemed less a symbol of unity and more a fragment torn from the night itself. The people whispered of it as the crown that split the moon. For when torchlight touched its gold, the branches that jutted upward caught the light and seemed to fracture the pale lunar glow into pieces. It was not like the crowns of the West, heavy with rubies and emeralds, laden with weight meant to press a king's head into humility. No, this crown was a forest of delicate antlers, wrought in hammered gold, thin as branches, rising like trees that reached for the stars. Its form seemed more alive than crafted. Some said it was less an ornament and more a ritual, a bridge between heaven and earth, a net meant to catch the radiance of the moon and hold it upon the brow of one who wore it. Baekje was a kingdom of rivers and hills, a land where night fell not in silence but in the songs of crickets and the whisper of reeds along the water. Its kings ruled not only through strength of armies but through the weight of symbols, through the way the people believed. And so the crown was more than gold, it was story, it was omen, it was destiny. The craftsmen who shaped it did not think merely of wealth. Gold, yes, was precious, but it was also light. The Baekje believed that gold held within it the captured fire of the sun and the distilled purity of the moon. To shape it was to command the elements themselves. When the hammer fell upon thin sheets of gold, when chisels cut delicate lines into its surface, when the crown's tall branching prongs were attached, the artisans were not making adornment. They were drawing a map of the cosmos, a reflection of the order they hoped to see mirrored in their kingdom. the crown had its silence. It was never spoken of lightly. It was not for the marketplace chatter, nor the tavern's laughter. It was held in the palace, in chambers where incense thickened the air, and light filtered through silk screens. It was seen only when the moment demanded it, at coronations, at rituals when kings walked between earth and heaven, at burials when a ruler departed not only from his throne, but from the world itself. The moon's split was a vision told in hushed words. The court records, if they ever wrote of it, are gone. But stories outlast ink. When the king placed the crown upon his brow beneath the pale sky, the moon seemed to fracture in its reflection, as though acknowledging that the one who wore it had power to divide heaven itself. Was it illusion, or did gold truly carry such weight upon the light? None could say, but the people believed, and belief is stronger than proof. Bakye's rulers knew this. To wear the crown was not only to carry a kingdom's wealth, but to shoulder its myth. Kings sat upon their thrones not merely by conquest or blood, but by a thread spun between heaven's gaze and earth's obedience. The crown was the tether, the visible proof that their reign was sanctioned by forces greater than themselves. Yet crowns, like kingdoms, are fragile. Gold bends easily. Power bends faster. The crown that split the moon was never forged for eternity. It was hammered thin, light enough to shimmer, delicate enough to break, and in this fragility lay its truth, that kings themselves were fragile, that kingdoms themselves could fracture, that the moon could split as surely as the people's faith. When Bakye fell, when armies marched and flames devoured its palaces, the crown did not vanish. Gold survives fire. It was taken, hidden, perhaps buried in tombs deep beneath the soil, perhaps carried away as spoils to foreign hands. Some whisper it lies still beneath the hills, its branches reaching in silence toward a sky it cannot see. Others claim it traveled across seas, fractured from its homeland, as surely as the moon's reflection fractured in its light. But the legend lingers. They say that if one were to hold the crown beneath a full moon, even now the light would bend and scatter, splitting into shards across the gold. To wear it would not only be to wear Bakye's lost power, but to risk dividing heaven again. And so, the crown is not merely an artifact. It is a question. Can power ever be whole? Can light ever be held without fracture? Can kingdoms endure without splitting, as the moon seemed to split when it struck against the crown's golden branches? The silence of the crown is deeper than its gold, for it does not answer. It waits. It waits in the soil, in memory, in the air of Korea's hills where once Bakye's kings walked. It waits for someone to remember, not just its beauty but its weight. It waits for the moon to rise again, and for its light to scatter across fragile gold, reminding the living that crowns are not circles at all. They are fractures, shimmering, delicate, impossible, holding together power only as long as belief allows. And so begins the tale of the crown that split the moon. The crown did not vanish when the kingdom of Bakye burned. Fire consumes wood and cloth, but gold endures. It survives even when everything around it turns to smoke and ash. The crown endured, but in endurance came silence. No record told precisely where it went when Bakye fell. Only whispers carried by the air, as if even the conquerors feared to name it. Some said it was locked away in a royal tomb, its branches folded like broken wings, left to guard the bones of the last who had worn it. Others swore it was carried off, hidden within temple walls, where monks treated it not as treasure but as relic, a fragile bridge between the mortal and the divine. The people remembered it differently. In the villages that survived war, where children asked their elders about the moon that rose above them, the answer came not in astronomy but in story. Once, they said, our kings wore a crown that split the moon, and when the light shattered, heaven looked down upon us. They spoke as if the crown had been more than metal, as if it were itself a presence, a watching thing, alive in its silence. The conquerors might have claimed the kingdom, but they could not claim that presence. Even when Bakye was swallowed by the tides of history, the idea of the crown lingered. For artifacts are not merely objects, they are echoes, and the crown's echo was long, stretching beyond the kingdom that had birthed it. The artisans who had made it never signed their names. In Bakye, the craftsman's glory was not in being remembered, but in the work itself surviving. Thin sheets of hammered gold, painstakingly cut, edges joined into the tall, antler-like prongs. Such work required more than skill. It required patience, a patience that no war could erase. Even centuries later, when other crowns of Silla and Goguryeo were unearthed, scholars marveled at their resemblance. Each branch, each delicate tine of gold seemed less ornament than incantation. These crowns were not of kings alone, but of the land itself, shaped to mirror trees, to mirror the heavens, to embody a cosmos greater than any single ruler. And so the Bakye crown lived on, not just in memory, but in parallel. Its form was echoed in crowns that still survive. each of them carrying that same strange shape, branches that rise, as though trying to pierce the night sky. What is a crown, after all, but a symbol that reaches upward? Yet here the upwardness was literal, gold antlers catching moonlight, splitting it, fracturing it across the wearer's head like a net of radiance. The people said the crown was dangerous. Too much light was never safe. To wear it was to risk carrying heaven's attention, and heaven's attention could be harsh. A king might stand tall in his crown, but he might also be consumed by the very forces it drew upon. Perhaps that was why Baekje fell, not only to armies but to the weight of symbols too powerful for any single ruler to contain. Stories cling to such things. The crown became less artifact and more omen. They said that on nights when the moon was full, its glow could be seen rippling strangely across certain hills near the river, as though the crown still lay buried there, catching and scattering light even underground. They said that those who dreamed near such hills often woke speaking words they did not know, phrases in tongues older than their own, as if the crown itself whispered through their sleep, and so it remained, half forgotten, half feared. Archaeologists in later centuries would marvel at crowns unearthed from tombs in Gyeongju, in other kingdoms of Korea, but Baekje's crown itself was more elusive. Perhaps it was truly lost, melted down, its delicate branches broken, yet the myth endured, and myths are their own kind of survival. The crown's silence asked a question that stretched far beyond Baekje. Can human hands ever hold the heavens? Can thin gold ever capture the moon? Or does every attempt at grasping light result only in fracture, only in scattering, only in the shiver of beauty too fragile to last? As centuries passed, the people of the peninsula looked to the sky, and still wondered. The moon was whole above them, yet memory insisted it could be split. The crown had taught them so. And even in ruin, the crown had become eternal. Not in its gold, but in its echo. In the way the idea of it bent their gaze upward and made them believe that power was never simply human, but always balanced precariously between earth and the wide watching night. And perhaps, even now, somewhere beneath the soil, the crown lies waiting. Its branches are thin, its gold is fragile, but its silence is vast. If uncovered, if lifted again beneath the full moon, who can say what light would scatter? Who can say what heavens would once more turn their gaze toward the earth? The crown does not speak. It does not need to. It waits, as all true symbols wait. Not for kings, not for armies, but for those who remember that power is not in possession but in belief. Not in the circle of gold but in the way it splits the light of the moon and shows the world that nothing, not even heaven, is whole. The drum that summoned the sky. Long before stone cities rose, before the names of kings were etched into walls of bronze, or carved into the bones of temples, there was sound. Not the kind of sound that comes from mere voices or footsteps or the chatter of daily life, but the kind of sound that makes the ground itself tremble, that carries across rivers and forests and mountains, that seems to ripple through the very fabric of the sky. It was this sound that the people of the Red River Delta sought to capture when they shaped a drum, not from skin or clay, but from metal, when they pulled the hidden veins of copper and tin from the earth, smelted them together in fire, and cast from that glowing liquid a circle that would outlast empires. That circle became the Dongsun drum. The drum was more than an object. To hold one was to hold the voice of a world still raw, still unshaped, still echoing with the rhythms of storms and the tides of the sea. Its surface was wide, its body hollow, its walls thick with stories hammered into bronze. Around its face were carved spirals, sunbursts, boats carrying rowers across waves, warriors with plumes on their helmets, dancers raising their arms as if in endless celebration. Each image seemed to move, to pulse with life. And when the drum was struck, when the bronze skin rang out, those images did not sit still. They seemed to leap forward, to break free from the surface, to join the air. The first time the villagers heard the sound, they must have known it was not ordinary. Bronze was already precious, shaped into spears and axes and ornaments of status, but to pour so much of it into something that could not kill, could not cut, must have felt like a gamble. Yet when the mallet struck, the sound rolled out like thunder. The riverbanks caught it and sent it rippling outward. The forest carried it. The sky itself seemed to bend low, listening. In that moment, the drum was no longer an object, it was a bridge. Who built the first of them is not recorded, for these drums predate history. They belong to a time when writing was unknown here, when memory was kept in song and ritual. Yet the very act of casting them speaks of mastery. To make one drum, molten bronze had to be poured into molds that were delicate and immense. Too hot, and the bronze would crack. Too cold, and it would seize, refusing to flow into the fine designs that marked its surface. The makers must have been both smiths and priests, workers of fire and of mystery. To them the drum was not simply made, it was summoned, born from fire, the way the sun itself rises from the horizon. And so the drum spread, across the Red River Delta, across the mountains of northern Vietnam, even across seas to distant islands, the Dongsun drums traveled. Each bore the same great face, a central star, its rays stretching outward, ring after ring of patterns encircling it. Was that star the sun? Was it the center of the cosmos? The people never wrote the answer, but perhaps they did not need to. To strike the drum was to know. Villages used them to call gatherings. When the drum sounded, people came, not just from houses nearby but from fields, from boats, from across valleys. Its voice was deep, insistent, impossible to ignore. It could mark the start of planting, the time of harvest, the call to war, the mourning of the dead. It was heartbeat and thunder, command and lament, all at once. To hear it was to remember that the world was larger than oneself. But there were other uses, more secret, more sacred. At night, when the moon was thin, when clouds swept across the sky like veils, the drum was played not for humans but for the unseen. Priests struck its bronze surface in slow, measured rhythms, and the sound rose into the darkness. They said it called the ancestors, that the spirits of the dead came to listen, drawn back to the village they had left behind. Others said the drum called the rain, that when its thunder rolled, clouds gathered, heavy with water. There were even whispers that it could call lightning, that the sky itself would split when the bronze rang loud enough. The people believed this because they had seen it. They had seen storms break after ceremonies, seen rains return to parched fields. Was it coincidence, or was the drum truly a voice the sky recognized? They could not be certain, but certainty was not required. Belief was enough. Each drum was heavy, weighing hundreds of pounds, yet they were carried across seas, traded, gifted, even buried with the dead. Archaeologists have unearthed them in the graves of chieftains, laid beside weapons and ornaments, as if no leader could be complete without the sound of the drum. To go into death without it would be to go voiceless. But with it the dead could summon the sky, even from beneath the earth. And so the drums multiplied. Each was unique, its designs telling stories no longer remembered. Some showed warriors in procession, others showed storks and deer, others still the endless swirling of water. Yet all bore the star at the center, the radiant burst that scholars now call the sun pattern. It is as if the makers believed the drum's face was a cosmos in miniature, a universe that could be held and sounded at will. Imagine the scene, a gathering in a clearing, the villagers standing in a circle, the fire burning low. At the center, the drum, a man or woman lifts the mallet and strikes. The sound rolls out, steady, measured. The people begin to move, their feet finding the rhythm, their voices rising in song. They dance around the fire, around the drum, until the line between sound and movement blurs, until it feels as if the ground itself is dancing with them. Above, the stars seem to flicker in time, as though the sky has joined their circle, and in that moment, they are not mere villagers in a world of uncertainty. They are part of something vast, something that includes not only the earth but the heavens above. The drum did not merely mark time, it stretched it, binding past to present, humans to spirits, earth to sky. Each strike of bronze was a reminder that the world was alive, that even silence had a rhythm waiting to be heard. And so, when we look today at the Dongsan drums, unearthed from riverbeds, pulled from tombs, preserved in museums, what we see is not just metal. We see the echo of thunder, the memory of storms, the trembling of earth beneath the voice of bronze. We see a people who believed they could summon the sky, and perhaps in their own way they did. For sound, once born, never truly dies. It travels, disperses, becomes vibration, becomes silence. The sound of the Dongsan drum still lingers, scattered in the air of the Red River Delta, in the stones of its mountains, in the waters that still ripple under moonlight. Strike one today, and you may hear not just bronze, but the weight of centuries, the voices of ancestors, the heartbeat of a land that once dared to speak to the heavens. The drum waits, the sky waits, and between them lies the story of a people who believed that through rhythm, through sound, through bronze made radiant in fire, the earth could call to the heavens, and the heavens would answer. The Dongsan drums were never merely instruments of sound, they were instruments of memory, of power, of belief. When one strikes a drum today, it is tempting to see it as a relic, a beautiful artifact, a testament to ancient craftsmanship. But for the people who made them, for the villagers and priests and warriors who gathered around them, each drum was alive, each beat a pulse in a living network of earth and sky. The sound carried meaning deeper than words, deeper than any story etched into stone or written on paper. It was a language older than history, older than kingdoms, older than the rivers themselves. Consider the rivers that cradled the Dongsan culture. The Red River, winding and twisting through plains and mountains, was more than water. It was a lifeline, a path for trade, a source of nourishment and danger. But it was also a messenger. When the drum's sound reached its banks, it could travel, carried on the surface of the water, amplified by its flow, reaching villages far downstream. In those distant villages, people would hear the sound, recognize its patterns, and understand that an event was taking place. Perhaps it was a call to war, a time to harvest rice, a ceremonial gathering of spirits and ancestors. The drum was the voice that spoke to everyone who could hear, and in doing so, bound disparate communities into a network larger than any single settlement. The designs on each drum added layers of meaning. Warriors, with plumes rising from their helmets, are often depicted in mid-stride, poised with shields and spears. These images are not idle decoration. They encode movement, strategy, and ritual. They are frozen stories of valor, teaching future generations how to prepare, how to observe, how to survive. Boats rowed across rippling waves, often in perfect symmetry, perhaps illustrating a procession, a migration, or the flow of life itself. Birds, deer, storks, and other creatures occupy the spaces between, symbols of abundance, fertility, and the cycles of the natural world. At the center, the sunburst, or star, the heart of the drum, reminds all who see it that above all else, the cosmos watches, guiding and witnessing every act below. The drums were central to rites that we can only begin to imagine. Some rituals may have lasted hours, days, even nights, with the drum's vibrations marking the passage of time as stars rotated overhead. Priests struck the drum in precise sequences, patterns that could mimic the sounds of rain, the call of the wind, or the movements of celestial bodies. To hear it was to feel the rhythm of the cosmos, to internalize the cycles of sun and moon, river and storm. Some scholars have speculated that the drums were used to synchronize community action, planting, harvesting, hunting, even warfare. But for the people themselves, it was probably more than pragmatic. It was sacred. Burial practices underscore the spiritual significance of the drum. High-ranking leaders, warriors, or priests were often interred with one or more drums placed nearby. Some were buried atop their tombs, others inside chambers built to amplify the drum's voice even after death. The placement suggests a belief that the dead could continue to call to the living, that their voices, through the resonance of bronze, could still influence events in the world above. The drum became both a medium and a message, a tangible object connecting the living and the dead, earth and sky. Traveling beyond the heart of the Red River Delta, Dongsun drums appear in tombs and sites across Southeast Asia. They were gifts, offerings, trophies, symbols of power, and carriers of ritual knowledge. Some were exchanged as part of marriage alliances or trade agreements, others were laid as offerings to mark boundaries or sanctify lands. Every drum carries within it traces of multiple lives and lands, bearing the echoes of voices that spanned valleys, rivers, and seas. In some cases, drums were even inscribed with markings denoting the ruler or clan that commissioned them, further embedding the instrument within social and political structures. The sound of a Dongsun drum is unlike any modern percussion. When struck, its bronze reverberates with a complexity that seems to contain within it multiple voices, low tones like the rolling of distant thunder, higher tones like wind through reeds, the subtle harmonic hum that lingers long after the mallet is lifted. In the quiet of night, under the stars, the effect must have been mesmerizing. Imagine standing in a village square, the drum resonating beneath your hands and in your chest, and seeing the flicker of firelight across the faces of friends, strangers, and spirits alike. The rhythm enters the body, unites people in movement, in song, in trance. Some scholars suggest that the drum may have induced altered states of consciousness, enabling priests and participants to commune with ancestors or deities. The sound was, in a sense, a bridge to other worlds. Even today, after centuries of wars, floods, and natural disasters, the drums survive in museums, private collections, and occasional archaeological finds. Each is a testament to the skill and vision of a civilization that understood metal, sound, ritual, and cosmology with a precision that continues to astonish modern researchers. Modern metallurgists examine the alloys and casting techniques, marveling at how thin walls could withstand the pounding of centuries. Anthropologists study the iconography, decoding symbols that reveal insights into social hierarchy, spiritual belief, and daily life. Yet, as much as we learn from these drums, their essence eludes us. To hold one in your hands, to feel the weight of bronze and the echoes of vibration, is to touch something beyond knowledge, a heartbeat of a world that still resonates. Stories of the drum's power persisted long after the decline of the Dongsun culture. Legends say that when drums were struck in specific patterns, storms could be summoned or subdued, that armies could be rallied across great distances, that rivers would rise or fall. Some even believed the drum could communicate with the spirits of the dead, sending messages across the boundary between life and death. And perhaps, in the rhythm and vibration of bronze, in the resonance that carried across land and water, this belief was not entirely imagined. Sound travels. And in those ancient days with fewer obstacles and a more attuned world, who is to say the sound did not ripple further than we can measure, influencing events in ways that science today cannot explain? The aesthetic beauty of the drums cannot be overstated. When polished, the bronze gleamed like sunlight on water. Every hammer mark, every swirl and figure was intentional, a testament to the craftsmanship of artisans whose hands were guided by tradition, ritual, and inspiration. The drums were both tools and art, each a visual and auditory expression of a culture that revered life, nature, and the cosmos. Their designs served as mnemonic devices, helping transmit stories, genealogies, and teachings in a society without widespread literacy. In a sense, each drum was a book, a map, a calendar, a religious text, and a musical instrument rolled into one, and so, as we stand now in the presence of these drums, whether in museum halls or through photographs and replicas, it is impossible not to feel the magnitude of their influence. They are not merely artifacts, they are messages across time. Their sound, though faint now, has not disappeared. It echoes in the patterns of history, in the rituals of the land, in the lingering rhythm of human curiosity. We hear it if we listen closely, a reminder that civilization itself was once inseparable from rhythm, from vibration, from the pulse of the earth and sky. The Dongsun drums summon us still. They call us to imagine the world as the ancient people did, to feel the connection between earth, river, and sky, between the living and the dead. They remind us that music is not merely entertainment, that instruments are not merely tools, and that bronze is not merely metal. Within each drum is encoded the knowledge, faith, and creativity of a civilization that dared to speak to the heavens, and in doing so, left a sound that will never truly vanish. As night falls over modern cities and villages, the Dongsun drum still speaks. Its echoes linger in memory, in imagination, in scholarship, in reverence. Its pulse resonates with every drumbeat that follows, reminding us that we too are part of a continuum of human experience. That sound and rhythm are threads connecting us to ancestors, to landscapes, to skies that have always listened. When the drum is struck, whether by hand or in the mind, the sky answers, and we hear, faint but unmistakable, the voice of a people who once believed, and perhaps rightly, that with bronze and rhythm they could touch the stars. The drum waits, patient as ever, as the centuries sweep past it. It waits to be struck, to be heard again, to remind the world that the power of sound is ancient, that the reverberations of faith, art, and ritual are eternal, that even a piece of bronze can become a bridge between earth and sky, and if we listen closely, we may still hear it, the drum that summoned the sky, echoing through time, teaching us to listen to the world, and perhaps to listen to ourselves.